Welcome, travelers. Rest your weary heads and listen, for the wind whispers of a heavy secret pulled from the river's depths. We speak of a locked chest and a journey born of longing, a tale where the allure of three rare fruits sows the seeds of a dark enigma. Prepare yourselves, for in this story, sweetness and sorrow grow from the same branch.
The sun dips below the dunes, and the desert wind whispers tales of old. You have arrived at the midnight oasis.
Chapter 1. Fate does not always announce its arrival with the thunder of war drums or the grand proclamations of kings. Often, it enters the world in silence, wrapped in the unassuming guise of the ordinary. In this tale, our doom was born in the sun-drenched orchards of Basra, hanging from a bough that groaned under the weight of a singularly magnificent harvest. It was an apple, yet it was more than fruit. Its skin was the color of a fresh wound, a crimson so deep and vibrant it seemed to pulse with an inner light, drinking in the golden heat of the sun and holding it hostage within its flesh. The gardener who plucked it felt a sudden, inexplicable sharp pang of envy toward his neighbor, a feeling he had never harbored before. He frowned, shaking the feeling off as he placed the crimson sphere into a crate woven from palm fronds. This was the first ripple in a pond that would soon drown a household in blood. The apple, nestled among its paler brothers, began its journey up the winding, treacherous currents of the Tigris, bound for the great jewel of the world, Baghdad. The river journey was plagued by minor calamities. The boatman, usually a man of jovial spirits, found himself seized by a dark irritation whenever he passed near the cargo. He struck his apprentice for a minor clumsiness, a cruelty that left the boy weeping, and the old man confused by his own sudden rage. The winds seemed to howl with a sharper bite around the vessel, and the waters chopped at the hull with malicious intent. The apple lay in the dark, a silent passenger, fermenting not with rot, but with a magical discord that amplified the darkest whispers of the human heart. When the vessel finally docked at the bustling wharves of Baghdad, the city of peace was anything but peaceful. The midday sun beat down upon the clay bricks and the turquoise domes, baking the streets where merchants cried out their wares and beggars pleaded for mercy. The crate was offloaded, passed from the calloused hands of the sailor to the greedy grasp of a fruit merchant. As the merchant arranged the apples on his stall in the grand souk, a crowd gathered. They were drawn to the crimson fruit like moths to a flame. The scent it gave off was intoxicating, sweet, crisp, and laced with a memory of something forgotten and deeply desired. Through the press of the crowd, a man forced his way to the front. He was not a lord or a vizier, but a servant, his tunic stained with the dust of frantic travel, and his eyes wide with desperation. This was the steward of a noble house, a man loyal to his master, Arik, and his mistress, the fair Lady Shivi. The servant was breathless, his chest heaving as he stared at the fruit. "The apples of Basra," the servant gasped, his voice trembling. "My mistress, she is ill, a fever of the spirit. She craves only this. I have searched the entire city." The merchant, sensing the desperation, felt a twist of avarice coil in his gut, a greed sharper and colder than his usual haggling nature. "These are rare," the merchant sneered, his hand hovering protectively over the crimson prize. "They have traveled far and cost me much. The price is 3 gold dinars. It was a robbery, a price so exorbitant it would feed a family for a month. But the servant did not haggle. The atmosphere around the stall had grown tense. The other shoppers glared with irrational hostility, their patience worn thin by the mere presence of the object. The servant fumbled with his purse, his fingers shaking as he produced the gold. He felt a wave of nausea, a sudden flash of resentment towards the merchant, towards his master Arik, towards the heat of the day. But he swallowed the bile, driven by the singular duty to save his mistress. "Take it," the servant spat, slapping the coins onto the wood. He snatched the apple, cradling it against his chest as if it were a fragile heart. He turned and fled the market, pushing through the throngs of people who seemed to shove back with unnecessary force. He ran through the winding alleyways, past the shadow of the great mosques and the fragrant courtyards of the wealthy. The apple felt heavy in his hands, heavier than any fruit had the right to be. It was a burden, a dense stone of destiny that he was carrying straight into the sanctuary of a loving home. The servant arrived at the gate of a modest but elegant house, the residence of Arik and Shivi. He pounded on the wood, the sound echoing like a gavel striking a judge's block. The door creaked open, revealing the cool, dim interior of the courtyard, a sanctuary of jasmine and fountain water. With a sigh of relief that was tragically premature, the servant stepped across the threshold. The door clicked shut behind him, sealing the house from the noise of the city, but locking the true danger inside. The crimson fruit had arrived. The seed of tragedy had been planted, and in the hallowed halls of Arik's home, the harvest would be bitter indeed. Chapter 2. In the illustrious city of Baghdad, where the golden domes of mosques kissed the heavens, and the air was perpetually thick with the scent of spices and jasmine, the Tigris River flowed like a vein of silver through the heart of the empire. It was a river of history, witnessing the rise and fall of dynasties, carrying the whispers of lovers and the secrets of the night down to the sea. But for one old man, the river was not a poetic muse, but a harsh and fickle master. He was a fisherman, a man whose skin had been leathery and darkened by decades of unforgiving sun, and whose hands were scarred by the bite of salt and the friction of ropes. Poverty had made a home in his household, sitting in the corner like an unwanted guest that refused to leave. On this particular morning, the fisherman had risen before the call to prayer, his stomach gnawing at his ribs with the hollow ache of hunger. His wife and children lay sleeping on their thin mats, their faces gaunt, trusting in him to return with the bounty of the waters. With a heavy heart and a silent prayer upon his cracked lips, he took up his net, a patchwork of mended twine and hope, and made his way to the riverbank. The morning mist still clung to the surface of the water as he cast his net. Once, twice, thrice he threw it, the weighted edges splashing softly into the dark currents. But each time he hauled it back empty, save for sludge and broken reeds. Despair began to pool in his chest, colder than the river mud. He moved downstream, seeking a spot where the waters churned with more life, and cast his net a fourth time with all the strength remaining in his frail arms. "O provider," he whispered to the wind, "grant me this day my daily bread, for I have no strength left to beg." Suddenly, the cords of the net went taut. The water roiled, and the weight in his hands was immense, nearly pulling him off his feet and into the depths. A spark of joy ignited in his eyes. Surely, this was a great fish, a monster of the deep that would fetch a high price at the market, enough to feed his family for a week, perhaps a month. He braced his feet against the slippery clay of the bank, gritting his teeth, straining every muscle as he hauled the net inch by agonizing inch against the current. He waded into the shallows, the water soaking his tunic, and grabbed the mesh with both hands. But as the object breached the surface, the fisherman's joy evaporated into confusion. It was not the shimmering scales of a giant fish that broke the water, but the dull, dark wood of a large chest. He dragged it onto the dry land, his breath coming in ragged gasps. It was a heavy thing, reinforced with iron bands and sealed with a sturdy lock of copper. He sat beside it, shivering, water dripping from his beard. Disappointment washed over him. He could not eat wood and iron. Yet, as he stared at the chest, a new thought took root. A locked chest found in the river might contain treasures, gold, silks, or jewels lost by a merchant barge. Fate has given me a mystery instead of a meal, he muttered. I dare not open it here, lest thieves see me. I must take this to the highest authority. The Caliph, King Rashid, is a man of justice and generosity. Perhaps he will reward me for this strange catch. It was a bold, perhaps foolish plan, but desperation creates its own courage. With a groan of exertion, the fisherman hoisted the heavy chest onto his head, balancing the wet, dripping burden as he marched through the waking streets of Baghdad. He walked past the bakers firing their ovens and the merchants unrolling their carpets, his eyes fixed on the towering gates of the palace. The guards at the palace, accustomed to the oddities of the city, saw the struggle in the old man's gait and the strange cargo he bore. Whether out of pity or curiosity, they allowed him passage into the outer court, and word was sent to the inner chambers where the commander of the faithful sat. King Rashid was seated upon his throne, a man of imposing presence and keen intellect, flanked by his trusted vizier and companion, Jafaar. The morning had been dull, filled with the tedious administration of state, and the caliph's eyes lit up with interest when the fisherman was brought before him. The old man knelt, the heavy chest landing with a solid, ominous thud on the marble floor. "O Prince of the Faithful," the fisherman said, his voice trembling not with fear, but with the exhaustion of his labor. "I am a poor man with a family to feed. I cast my net into the Tigris seeking sustenance, and Allah sent me this. It is heavy, locked, and surely contains something of import. I offer it to you, for whatever lies within is fit for a king, or perhaps for the king's justice. All I ask is a small reward to fill the bellies of my children." King Rashid leaned forward, his gaze fixed on the water-stained wood. Beside him, Jafaar stroked his beard, his eyes narrowing as he studied the object. There was an aura about the chest, a silence that felt too heavy, a stillness that felt unnatural. "You have done well to bring this to me," King Rashid declared, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "If it is treasure, you shall have your share. If it is nothing but stones, I shall still reward your honesty and your labor." The king gestured to Jafaar. "Come, let us see what the river has been hiding from us. Break the lock, Jafaar, and reveal the secrets of the deep." The court fell silent. The only sound was the rustle of Jafar's silk robes as he stepped down from the dais, drawing a small, sturdy dagger from his belt. The fisherman held his breath, hoping for gold, while the caliph watched with the intense curiosity of a man who knew that in Baghdad, every closed box was a story waiting to be told. The lock clicked under Jafar's hand, a sharp sound that rang like a gunshot in the quiet room, signaling the end of the mystery and the beginning of the nightmare. Chapter 3. The silence in the grand hall of the palace was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered the usual whispers of the court. All eyes were fixed upon the center of the marble floor, where the wooden chest, stained with the mud of the Tigris, sat like a dark omen. Jafaar, the Grand Vizier, knelt beside the box, his hand resting upon the heavy iron lid. The lock had been broken, its copper mechanism yielding to the force of the dagger, and now nothing remained but to reveal what lay within. The poor fisherman stood nearby, wringing his hands, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He dreamed of gold, of jewels that sparkled like the stars, of a reward that would lift his family from the dust of poverty. King Rashid leaned forward on his throne, his eyes narrowing with anticipation. "Open it, Jafaar," the Caliph commanded, his voice echoing off the high, vaulted ceiling. "Let us see what the river has yielded." With a deep breath, Jafaar gripped the edge of the lid and heaved it upward. The hinges groaned, a sound like a dying gasp, as the heavy wood fell back. The court craned their necks, expecting the glint of dinars or the shimmer of silk. Instead, they saw a large basket woven from palm leaves, sewn shut with red cord. Jafaar drew his dagger once more and sliced through the twine. He pulled back the palm leaves to reveal a coarse carpet. His brow furrowed. He unfolded the carpet, revealing a white veil, delicate and sheer, covering something beneath. A sense of dread, cold and sharp, began to creep into Jafar's heart. There was no smell of metallic gold here, no clatter of coins. There was only a stillness that felt profound and unnatural. With trembling fingers, he lifted the veil. A collective gasp tore through the room, followed immediately by a horrified silence that was far worse than the first. There were no jewels. There was no treasure. Lying within the chest was the body of a young woman. Her skin was as pale as silver, her hair like a cascade of the darkest night, but her beauty was marred by a violence so terrible it defied reason. She had been cut into pieces, dismembered with a savagery that spoke of a rage beyond madness. It was Shivi. Even in death, her face held an expression of sorrow, a silent accusation against the world that had allowed such a crime. The fisherman let out a cry of terror and fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands. "Mercy, O king, mercy! I know nothing of this. I sought only fish." King Rashid rose from his throne, his face draining of color, replaced instantly by a flush of righteous fury. He descended the steps of the dais, his robes billowing around him like a storm cloud. He stood over the chest, looking down at the broken form of Shivi. Tears of anger and pity welled in the caliph's eyes. This was not merely a murder, it was a desecration. It was a stain upon his reign, a declaration that in the city of peace, there was no peace to be found for the innocent. "Is this how my people are treated?" King Rashid roared, his voice shaking the very pillars of the hall. "Is this the safety I provide? That a woman may be butchered and cast into the river like refuse, to rot in the dark while I sit upon my throne." He spun around to face Jafaar. The vizier had risen to his feet, his face pale, his usual composure shattered by the gruesome sight. "Jafaar, look upon this. Look at the fruit of your negligence. You are the guardian of this city's order. You are the one who is meant to know the heartbeat of Baghdad. How could such a monstrosity occur under your watch?" Jafaar bowed his head, unable to meet the burning gaze of his master. "O commander of the faithful, I am struck dumb with horror. This is a crime of the deepest evil. Evil indeed," King Rashid shouted, "and it shall not go unpunished. I will not have my reign remembered for the blood of the innocent flowing in the Tigris. Listen to me well, Jafaar. I charge you with a task, and let your life depend upon it." The king pointed a trembling finger at the chest. "Find the one who did this. Find the murderer of this woman. I give you 3 days. 3 suns shall rise and set." And if you do not bring the culprit before me to face justice, then by the one who created the heavens and the earth, I shall have you hanged at the gate of the palace in their stead. You and 40 of your kinsmen shall pay the price for this failure." Jafaar looked up, his eyes wide. The ultimatum hung in the air, sharp as an executioner's blade. 3 days to solve a murder with no witnesses, no clues, and a victim found in a river that washed away all tracks. 3 days, Jafaar, King Rashid whispered, the fire in his voice cooling to a deadly ice. "Do not fail me." The guards moved forward to close the chest, shielding the court from the tragic sight of Shivi, but the image was already burned into their minds. The fisherman was given a handful of gold and sent away, weeping with relief and trauma, leaving Jafaar alone in the center of the room. The weight of the chest was gone, but a heavier burden had taken its place. The clock had begun to tick. The mystery of the 3 apples had revealed its first, bloody fruit, and now the hunt was on. Chapter 4. The first day of the Caliph's ultimatum dawned with a sky the color of bruised iron, casting a pallid light over the awakening city of Baghdad. Jafaar, the Grand Vizier, had not slept. The image of the woman in the chest, the fair Shivi, haunted the corridors of his mind, her silent face demanding a justice he was terrified he could not provide. 3 days. The words echoed in his head like the tolling of a funeral bell. 3 days to find a needle in a haystack, the size of an empire, or else his own life, and the lives of 40 of his kinsmen would be forfeit. He stood in his private chambers, staring at the only other object found within the crate aside from the tragic victim. Tucked amidst the folds of the shroud, hidden like a jewel in a tomb, was an apple. It was not a common fruit, withered and small, but a magnificent specimen of crimson perfection. Its skin was smooth and vibrant, glowing with an almost supernatural luster, even in the dim light of the morning. It carried a scent that was at once sweet and melancholic, a fragrance that seemed to whisper of distant gardens and long journeys. "This is the key," Jafaar murmured to himself, lifting the fruit. A common murderer does not leave behind a king's ransom in fruit. With the apple concealed within the folds of his silk sash, Jafaar set out from the palace. He did not travel with the pomp and circumstance of his station, surrounded by guards and heralds. Instead, he moved with the grim determination of a hunter, his face set in lines of hard concentration. His destination was the great souk of Baghdad, the throbbing heart of commerce where the wealth of the world changed hands. The market was a cacophony of life. The air was thick with the dust of camels, the smoke of roasting meats, and the shouts of merchants extolling the virtues of their wares. Jafaar pushed through the throng, his eyes scanning the stalls. He ignored the jewelers and the carpet weavers, the spice merchants and the slave traders. He sought the sellers of fruit, the men who knew the soil and the seasons better than they knew their own wives. He found the guild of the fruit sellers near the western gate, where the shade of the awnings provided some relief from the climbing sun. He approached the stall of an elder merchant, a man named Hakim, whose beard was white as frost and whose hands were stained with the juices of 1,000 harvests. "Peace be upon you, Hakim," Jafaar said, his voice cutting through the din. The old merchant looked up, squinting, and upon recognizing the Grand Vizier, he scrambled to bow low, his forehead touching the dusty ground. "And upon you be peace, O Vizier of the King. To what do I owe this immense honor? Does the palace require pomegranates from the hills, or dates from the Oasis?" "I require knowledge," Jafaar said, stepping into the shade of the stall. He reached into his sash and produced the crimson apple, Tell me of this fruit. Look at it closely. Smell it. Where does such a thing grow? Hakim straightened, wiping his hands on his apron. He took the apple with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. He turned it over in his calloused palms, bringing it to his nose to inhale deeply. His eyes widened, and a look of wistful recognition crossed his weathered face. By Allah, Hakim whispered, I have not seen such a fruit in many years. This is no ordinary apple, my lord. This is a jewel of Basra. Basra? Jafaar repeated, the name of the distant city landing heavily in the air. Yes, Hakim confirmed, handing the fruit back as if it were made of fragile glass. These grow only in the private orchards of Basra, fed by the sweet waters of the Shat al-Arab. They are rare, my lord, exceedingly rare. They do not travel well, and the season for them is short. To find one here in Baghdad, fresh and unbruised, it speaks of great expense and great effort. Jafar's mind raced. Basra was days away by river, weeks by road. Who sells them here? Who imports them? The old merchant shook his head slowly. None of us, O vizier. We deal in the common bounty of the earth. To bring the apples of Basra to Baghdad requires a special caravan or a fast boat paid for with heavy gold. No merchant in this souk has had them this season. If this fruit is here, it was brought by a private hand, a traveler, or a messenger sent specifically for that purpose. Jafaar felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The clue had narrowed the world, yet expanded the mystery. He was not looking for a common thief who killed for a purse of copper. He was looking for someone with the means to command travel, someone with the desire to possess the rare and the beautiful, someone who had connections to the southern orchards. Think, Hakim, Jafaar pressed, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Have you heard rumors? Has anyone boasted of such a prize? A wealthy lord? A lovesick poet? I hear only the gossip of the market, my lord, Hakim replied, his voice trembling under the vizier's intensity. But 3 days ago, yes, 3 days ago, I heard a servant complaining. He was asking every stall for apples for his mistress, a woman sick with fever who craved only the red fruit. He was desperate, weeping almost, but he found none here. A servant, Jafaar seized upon the word. Did you know him? Whose house did he serve? I do not know his name, the merchant said, apologizing with his eyes, but he wore the tunic of a household in the district of Kark, near the river. He was a tall man with a scar upon his cheek. It was a thread, a thin, fragile thread, but it was all Jafaar had. The apple had come from Basra, but it had been sought by a desperate servant in Baghdad. The victim, Shivi, was likely the mistress who craved the fruit. The tragedy was domestic, born of love and sickness, not random violence. Jafaar turned from the stall, the crimson apple heavy in his hand. The sun was high now, casting short, sharp shadows. One half of the first day was gone. He had a district, he had a description of a servant, and he had the origin of the fruit. The investigation was moving, but the sands in the hourglass of his life were falling faster than he dared to count. He moved back into the heat of the crowd, heading toward the residential district of Kark, determined to pull on the thread until the whole bloody tapestry unraveled. Chapter 5. The district of Kark lay on the western bank of the Tigris, a labyrinth of narrow alleyways and high-walled courtyards where the shadows grew long and deep as the afternoon sun began its descent. Here, the noise of the great souk was a distant hum, replaced by the intimate sounds of daily life. The rhythmic sweeping of a broom, the laughter of children chasing stray cats, and the low murmur of gossip exchanged over garden walls. It was into this world of domestic quietude that Jafaar al-Barmaki now walked, a predator cloaked in the silk of a statesman. He moved with a deliberate slowness, his eyes sharp and assessing. The description given by the fruit seller, a tall servant with a scar, had been a breadcrumb leading him from the market to this specific cluster of homes. But a description was not a name, and a neighborhood was not a confession. Jafaar needed to hear the whispers of the stones themselves. He stopped by a public fountain where women were filling clay jars with cool water. Their chatter died instantly at the sight of his fine robes and the crest of the caliphate upon his breast. Jafaar offered a gentle smile, one that did not quite reach his weary eyes. "Peace be upon you, mothers of the faithful," Jafaar said softly. "I seek a house of sorrow. I am told a woman lives near here who has been struck down by a fever of the spirit, attended by a husband who loves her dearly, and a servant who bears a mark upon his face." The women exchanged glances. It was an elderly matron, her face a map of wrinkles and wisdom, who stepped forward. She wiped her hands on her apron and pointed a trembling finger toward a house at the end of the lane, distinguished by a heavy wooden door of dark oak. "You speak of the house of Arik," the woman said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He is a good man, Effendi, a merchant of textiles, and his wife, the Lady Shivi. Ah, she is a flower that has wilted too soon. She has been bedridden for weeks." Jafaar stepped closer, sensing the flow of information that only a neighbor could provide. "Tell me," he pressed gently, "has there been discord in that house? A change in the wind?" The woman frowned, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It is strange that you ask. For years, Arik and Shivi were like two doves in a nest. Never a harsh word, never a raised hand. But 3 days ago," she paused, looking toward the dark house with a mixture of fear and pity. 3 days ago, Jafaar repeated, the timeline aligning perfectly with the discovery of the chest. "Go on." "It was just after the midday prayer," she continued. "I heard Arik return. He is usually quiet, but that day, by Allah, the shouting shook the walls. It was not the voice of the man we know. It was a voice of thunder, of a rage so black it made my blood run cold. He was screaming of betrayal, of lies. And then, silence," the woman whispered. "A silence heavier than the shouting. I have not seen Shivi since, nor the servant. Only Arik, who leaves before dawn and returns after dark, walking like a man carrying the weight of the world on his back." Jafaar nodded slowly. The picture was forming in his mind, jagged pieces clicking together to form a mosaic of tragedy. A loving husband, a sudden sickness, a desperate servant seeking a rare fruit, and then an explosion of uncharacteristic, demonic rage followed by the silence of the grave. The timeline was exact. The behavior was anomalous. It smelled of a crime of passion, a moment where love curdled into something lethal. "You say this rage was unlike him?" Jafaar asked one final question. Completely, the neighbor affirmed. "Arik is a man of patience. To hear him scream so, it was as if a jinni had possessed him. As if something evil had taken hold of his heart and squeezed out all the light." Jafaar thanked the woman and placed a coin in her hand, instructing her to speak of this to no one. He turned and walked toward the dark oak door at the end of the lane. The street seemed to narrow as he approached, the overhanging balconies blocking out the sun, casting the entrance of Arik's home in shadow. He stood before the door for a long moment. He could feel the residual energy of the violence that had occurred here, a psychic stain that lingered in the wood and stone. He did not need to knock to know what he would find, but the law required order. He was not just a man, he was the hand of the Caliph. Jafaar raised his fist and struck the wood 3 times. The sound echoed hollowly within, like stones falling into a dry well. He waited. There was the sound of shuffling steps, slow and heavy. The lock turned with a rusty protest. The door creaked open, revealing a man who looked as though he had aged 20 years in 3 days. His eyes were red-rimmed and hollow, his skin gray, his clothes disheveled. This was Arik, the husband. He looked at Jafaar, and there was no surprise in his face, only a crushing, infinite resignation. "You have come," Arik said, his voice a dry rasp. "I have been waiting for the Caliph's justice." Jafaar looked past him into the dim courtyard. "I have come for the truth, Arik, and for the one who placed the crate in the river." Arik bowed his head, stepping back to allow the vizier entry. "Then enter, my lord. The truth is all I have left to give." As Jafaar crossed the threshold, the heavy door closed behind him, shutting out the whispers of the alleyway and sealing them inside with the ghosts of the recent past. The hunt was over, but the unraveling of the tragedy had only just begun. Chapter 6. The sun, indifferent to the fates of men, began its final descent behind the golden domes of Baghdad, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and bleeding orange. The 3rd day had vanished like smoke in a gale, and with it, the hope of Jafaar al-Barmaki. Despite his frantic search through the souks and the alleyways of Kark, the threads of the mystery had unraveled in his hands. The house he had found was empty, the occupants fled, the trail cold as the grave. The ultimatum of King Rashid hung over the city like a thunderhead. A life for a life. The Grand Vizier stood before the palace gates, stripped of his fine robes of office, wearing the simple white tunic of a man prepared to meet his creator. Behind him, the wailing of his kinsmen rose to the heavens, 40 souls of the Barmaki clan, all condemned to die for the failure of one. The crowd that had gathered was immense, a sea of silent faces stretching as far as the eye could see. They had come not to jeer, but to mourn, for Jafaar was beloved by the people for his wisdom and his generosity. King Rashid sat upon a raised dais, his face a mask of stone, though his eyes betrayed a deep and tormented sorrow. He loved Jafaar as a brother, yet a caliph's word was the law of the land. If he broke his own decree, the foundation of justice would crumble. He nodded once, a barely perceptible motion that signaled the end. The executioner, a mountain of a man with arms like tree trunks, stepped forward. The steel of his scimitar caught the dying light of the sun, gleaming with a terrifying promise. Jafaar knelt in the dust, bowing his head. He whispered a final prayer, closing his eyes against the world that had turned so suddenly cruel. The executioner raised the blade, the muscles of his back tightening for the strike. The crowd held its collective breath, the silence so profound that the flutter of a pigeon's wing sounded like a drumbeat. "Strike," Jafaar whispered, accepting his doom. "Wait, stay your hand." The cry tore through the silence, raw and desperate. It did not come from the dais, but from the edge of the crowd. A commotion erupted as a figure burst through the line of guards, stumbling and breathless. It was a young man, handsome of face but disheveled in spirit, his clothes torn and his eyes wild with a frantic terror. "Do not kill him." The young man screamed, throwing himself to his knees before King Rashid. "O commander of the faithful, spare this man. He is innocent. I am the one you seek. It was I who killed her. It was I who placed the body in the chest and cast it into the Tigris. Let the sword fall upon my neck, for the blood is on my hands." Jafaar opened his eyes, staring in bewilderment at the stranger. The executioner lowered his sword, looking to the Caliph for instruction. King Rashid leaned forward, his grip on the throne tightening. "You," the king asked, his voice echoing in the hush. "You confess to this atrocity? Who are you?" "I am Arik," the young man sobbed, pressing his forehead to the ground. "I am the husband of the murdered woman. I killed her in a fit of madness, and I cannot let an innocent man die for my sin. Take my life, O king, and let justice be done." But before the king could speak, another voice, older and frailer, cried out from the throng. "No, he lies. Do not listen to him." An old sheik, his beard white as snow and his back bent with the weight of years, pushed his way toward the dais. He hobbled to the side of Arik and grabbed the young man by the shoulder, trying to pull him back. "O Prince of the Faithful," the old man wheezed, tears streaming down his withered cheeks. "This boy is delirious with grief. He knows not what he says. I am the killer. I am Masum, the father of the girl. I was the one who took her life. I am old, my time is near. Do not cut down a young sapling when the old dry wood is ready for the fire. Kill me. Spare him and spare the vizier." "Father, no," Arik shouted, pushing the old man's hand away. "Why do you try to take my punishment? I did it. I struck her down. You are protecting me, my son." Masum countered, his voice cracking. "I cannot let you throw your life away. I am the culprit. I confess." The court was thrown into chaos. The crowd murmured in astonishment, witnessing a spectacle never before seen in the history of the empire. Two men fighting not to save their lives, but to end them. Jafaar stood up, the shadow of death lifting from his shoulders, replaced by a profound confusion. He looked from the weeping husband to the desperate father. King Rashid raised his hand, commanding silence. The authority in his gesture quelled the noise instantly. He looked down at the two men, his gaze piercing. "This is a strange day indeed," King Rashid declared. "One innocent man stood ready to die, and now two guilty men fight for the privilege of the sword. Only one of you can be the murderer. We shall not spill blood without the truth. Speak, young man. Tell me exactly how this came to pass, and why you claim this deed. And be warned, if you lie to save him, or if he lies to save you, the truth will be found." Arik looked up, his eyes meeting the Caliph's. The madness of his arrival faded, replaced by a crushing sorrow. "There is no lie in me, my king," Arik said softly. "I killed my wife, whom I loved more than life itself, and I did it because of an apple, a cursed crimson apple from Basra." The mention of the fruit sent a jolt through Jafaar. He stepped forward, his detective's instinct flaring to life once more. "The apple of Basra," Jafaar whispered. "Tell us, Arik, tell us everything." And so, beneath the first stars of the evening, with the executioner's sword returned to its sheath, the true story began to unravel, a tale not of simple malice, but of tragic misunderstanding, fueled by a magic that twisted love into hate. Chapter 7. The executioner's blade, a moment ago poised to drink the blood of the innocent, was slowly lowered, its cold steel reflecting the dying light of the sun. The crowd, a sea of thousands who had gathered to witness the fall of the great vizier, Jafaar, now stood in a silence so profound that the wind itself seemed to hold its breath. At the foot of the dais, where King Rashid sat in judgment, a tragic tableau had formed. Two men, one young and strong, the other old and withered, knelt in the dust, grasping at each other's robes, fighting a desperate war of love and sacrifice. Silence, King Rashid's voice boomed across the square, cutting through the murmurs of the populace. "The sword of justice does not strike blindly. Rise, both of you. I will hear the truth, and only the truth, before the sun sets completely." Arik, the husband, rose to his feet, pulling the weeping Masum up beside him. Ariq's face was a ruin of grief, his eyes haunted by a nightmare that had not ended when he woke. He looked at the Caliph, then at Jafaar, who stared back with a mixture of relief and confusion. "O Prince of the Faithful," Ariq began, his voice trembling with the weight of his confession, "this old man is Masum, the father of the woman I slew. He seeks to die in my place because he knows the depth of my love for his daughter, and he pities the madness that overtook me. But the hands that shed the blood were mine, and mine alone." He took a steadying breath, looking down at his trembling hands. "My wife, the Lady Shivi, fell ill with a terrible fever. For days she burned, and nothing would cool her spirit. In her delirium, she whispered a craving for a single thing, an apple from the orchards of Basra. She believed its juice would restore her. I, who would have plucked the stars from the sky for her, could do no less than this. I traveled to Basra," Ariq continued, writing day and night without rest. "The season was past and the trees were bare, but I found a gardener who had saved 3 apples, 3 globes of crimson perfection. I bought them for 3 gold dinars, a small fortune, but a price I paid gladly. I returned to Baghdad with the prize, presenting them to Shivi. She was pleased, but the fever had weakened her so that she could not eat, and she merely kept them by her pillow." Jafaar stepped closer, listening intently. The apple he had found in the chest was one of these 3. The pieces of the puzzle were aligning. "Then came the black hour," Ariq whispered, closing his eyes against the memory. "I went to my shop in the market. While I sat there, a tall black slave passed by, tossing a red apple in his hand, the very twin of those I had brought from Basra. I asked him, in jest, where he had found such a rare fruit. A shadow crossed Ariq's face, a darkness that seemed to emanate from the memory of the apple itself. The slave laughed. A cruel, mocking sound. He said to me, 'I received this from my mistress. I visited her while her husband was away. She had 3 apples by her bedside, which she said her cuckold of a husband had ridden to Basra to fetch. She gave me one as a token of our love.'" A gasp rippled through the court. King Rashid's eyes narrowed. The poison of a lie, whispered in a market, had found its mark. "The world turned red," Ariq confessed, his voice rising in anguish. "It was not a normal anger, my king. It was a possession, a fire ignited in my blood that consumed all reason. I felt a rage so pure, so absolute, that I was no longer a man, but a vessel of destruction. I ran home. I stormed into her chamber. I looked at the bedside, and there were only 2 apples. Masum let out a low moan of sorrow, burying his face in his hands. I did not ask her for truth," Ariq sobbed. "I did not listen to her pleas. The missing apple was the proof of the slave's story. In that cursed moment, with the red haze blinding me, I drew my knife and I ended her. I placed her in the chest, and I cast it into the Tigris. And the truth?" King Rashid asked softly. "When did the truth find you?" "When I returned home from the river," Ariq said, tears streaming freely now. "I sat in the ruins of my life. My young son came to me, weeping. He asked if I had seen his apple. He told me he had taken one of the 3 from his mother's room to play with in the street. He said a tall black slave had snatched it from his hand and run away, despite the boy telling him it belonged to his sick mother. The silence that followed was heavy with the tragedy of it all. A child's toy, a thief's lie, and a husband's unnatural rage had conspired to destroy a family. I killed her for a lie," Ariq cried out, falling to his knees again. "I killed the only thing I loved because a thief stole a fruit and boasted of it. Masum knows this. He knows I am not a murderer by nature, but a fool cursed by fate. That is why he tries to save me, but I cannot be saved. Take my head, O king. Let me join her in the darkness." King Rashid sat back, his heart heavy. The apple was indeed cursed, a conduit for chaos that had traveled from Basra to shatter a home in Baghdad. But the story was not finished. The caliph's gaze turned cold as steel. "You have confessed, Arik," the king said, "but there is another villain in this tale. The slave. The one who stole the apple from a child and poisoned your heart with a lie. He is the spark that burned your house down." The king turned to Jafaar, who had been listening with a dawning realization that froze the blood in his veins. The description: a tall black slave, the specific timeline, the arrogance. Jafar's mind raced to his own household, to the men he trusted, to the shadow that lived under his own roof. "Jafar," King Rashid commanded, "find this slave. For if Arik is to die, the liar who caused this calamity must surely stand beside him." Chapter 8. The court of King Rashid remained frozen in a hush, so profound that the flickering of the torches in the evening breeze sounded like the beating of great wings. Arik, the broken husband, knelt upon the cold stones, his tears falling like rain upon the desert floor. He gathered the shards of his courage to speak the rest of his sorrowful tale, his voice echoing with the hollow timbre of a man who has already died inside. "O commander of the faithful," Arik continued, his eyes fixed on the distant memory of a happier time. "My love for Shivi was not merely a duty, it was the breath in my lungs. When the fever took her, I felt her pain as my own. When she whispered her craving for the apples of Basra, I did not hesitate. I mounted my horse and rode south, driving the beast until its flanks were frothed with sweat. I crossed the arid plains and the marshlands, sleeping in the saddle, eating only dust and determination." He paused, swallowing a sob. "I arrived in Basra, that garden of the world, and found the orchard keeper. The season was over, the boughs bare, but he had saved 3 apples, 3 jewels of crimson fire. I paid him 3 gold dinars, a sum that would buy a small herd of goats. But to me, it was nothing. I held the cure for my beloved in my hands. I rode back to Baghdad with wings on my heels, the journey of 15 days condensed into a blur of hope. When I returned," Arik said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "I presented the fruit to Shivi. She smiled, O king, a weak and fragile smile that lit up the room, but the fever had stolen her strength. She could not eat. She placed the 3 apples by her pillow, breathing in their scent, and fell into a fitful sleep. I left her to rest, my heart heavy but hopeful, and went to my shop in the market to attend to my neglected trade." Arik's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles white. "It was there, in the souk, that the devil found me. I sat amidst my textiles, weary from the journey, when a tall, broad-shouldered slave passed by. In his hand, he tossed a red apple. It caught the sunlight, flashing like a ruby. My heart stopped. It was identical to the ones I had brought from Basra, the same size, the same deep, unnatural red. I called out to him," Arik recounted, a tremor entering his voice. "I asked, 'O friend, where did you find such a rare fruit?' The slave laughed, a sound that grated like sand on stone. He looked at me with eyes full of mockery and malice. 'This,' he sneered, tossing the apple high. 'I got it from my mistress. I visited her today while her fool of a husband was away. She told me the poor wretch had ridden all the way to Basra to fetch 3 apples for her fever. She had 3 by her bed, and she gave me one as a token of her love and a payment for a kiss." A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. King Rashid gripped the arms of his throne, his brow furrowed in anger at the cruelty of the lie. At his words, Arik said, looking up with eyes that still reflected the horror of that moment, "A darkness seized me. It was not ordinary anger, my lords. It was a black fire." The apple in the slave's hand seemed to pulse, and with every beat, it whispered poison into my ear. The love I held for Shivi curdled instantly into a hatred so pure, so violent, that it blinded me. I did not think, I did not reason. The magic of the fruit, or the madness of the devil, took the reins of my soul. I closed my shop and ran, he wept. I ran through the streets like a man possessed, the slaves' laughter chasing me. I burst into my home. I stormed into Shivi's chamber. She woke, startled by my fury. I looked at the pillow. There were only 2 apples. I did not ask, Arik groaned, rocking back and forth. I did not let her speak. The missing apple was the judge and the executioner. In that moment of accursed rage, I drew my knife, and I destroyed the world. I cut down the flower of my life. I packed her away in the chest, and I threw my heart into the Tigris. But the horror was not done, Arik whispered. I returned home, the red mist slowly fading, leaving only ash. My young son sat on the doorstep, weeping. I asked him why he cried. He looked up at me, his face stained with tears, and said, "Father, I took one of Mother's apples to play with in the street. A big slave came and snatched it from me. I told him it was for my sick mother, that you had brought it from Basra, but he beat me and ran away with it." The tragedy hung heavy in the air, a suffocating weight. The court understood now. The slave had stolen the apple from the child, and then used the truth of its origin to weave a lie that destroyed a family. "I killed her for nothing," Arik wailed, collapsing fully into the dust. "I killed her because a thief lied. Masum knows this. He seeks to save me, but I am already dead. I beg you, King Rashid, give me the piece of the sword. End this torment." Chapter 9. The confession of Arik hung in the night air like the final note of a funeral dirge, heavy and suffocating. The crowd was silent, their thirst for blood quenched by the sheer weight of the tragedy. King Rashid sat upon his throne, his face a mask of sorrowful contemplation. He looked from the weeping husband to the desolate father, and finally to his vizier. Jafaar stood apart, his brow furrowed, his mind racing not with the emotion of the moment, but with the cold, hard logic of a man who senses a piece of the puzzle does not fit. "Madness," Jafaar whispered to himself. He spoke of a black fire, of a possession. The vizier reached into the folds of his sash and withdrew the apple he had recovered from the chest, the twin of the one that had caused such ruin. In the flickering torchlight, the fruit seemed to pulse with an inner, malevolent life. Its skin was not merely red. It was the color of fresh arterial blood, slick and glistening as if it had just been pulled from a living chest. "Majesty," Jafaar said, his voice cutting through the silence. "Permission to speak." King Rashid nodded slowly. "Speak, Jafaar. What weighs upon your mind?" "I have heard the confession of Arik," Jafaar began, stepping into the center of the ring of light, "and I believe his grief is genuine. But there is a strangeness here. A man does not turn from a loving husband into a butcher in the span of a single heartbeat, solely on the word of a stranger. Jealousy is a poison, yes, but it is a slow poison. This was an explosion." Jafaar held the apple aloft. The crowd gasped as the light caught its unnatural sheen. "This fruit, I have carried it since we opened the chest, and as I hold it I feel a discord, a buzzing in the blood." He walked toward Arik, who looked up with dull, lifeless eyes. "Arik," Jafaar asked gently, "when you held the apple from Basra, did you feel a heat, a change in your spirit?" Arik nodded slowly. It was beautiful, he rasped, but when the slave tossed its brother in the air, the beauty turned to horror. It felt as if the apple was screaming at me. Jafaar turned back to the king. I suspect, O commander of the faithful, that this is no ordinary harvest. This apple is not merely fruit. It is a vessel. The vizier drew a small silver knife from his belt. The guards tensed, but Jafaar merely sliced a thin wedge from the crimson sphere. Immediately, a scent wafted through the courtyard, sweet, cloying, and intoxicating. But beneath the sweetness was the metallic tang of copper and old earth. Those closest to the dais shifted uncomfortably, sudden frowns marring their faces, petty grievances flaring in their minds for no reason. A guard glared at his comrade. A merchant felt a sudden spike of envy toward his neighbor. Do you feel it? Jafaar asked, his voice tight. The amplification, the irritation. This apple was grown in soil watered by magic, perhaps by the hands of the Jinn themselves. It resonates with the darkest parts of the human heart. It feeds on insecurity, on fear, on rage. When the slave lied, he struck a spark. But it was this cursed fruit that turned that spark into an inferno. King Rashid leaned forward, his eyes wide. Sorcery, ancient alchemy, Jafaar corrected. Nature twisted by unnatural intent. This explains the suddenness of the crime. Arik was not merely jealous. He was under the thrall of an enchantment that magnifies negative emotion 1,000-fold. He was a weapon, primed and loaded by the very object he sought to save his wife. The king looked at Arik with a new dawn of pity. Then he is a victim as well, King Rashid murmured. A victim of a curse he brought into his own home. He is guilty of the act, Jafaar said solemnly, but the intent was hijacked by this dark relic. However, the catalyst, the one who lit the fuse, remains at large. The apple sat dormant until the lie was told. The magic required a trigger. Jafaar sheathed his knife and wrapped the apple carefully in a cloth of silk, stifling its baleful aura. The tension in the courtyard dissipated instantly, leaving only the cool night air. The magic of the apple explains the madness, Jafaar concluded, but it does not explain the lie. The slave who stole the fruit from the child, who mocked Arik in the market. He is the true architect of this disaster. He played with a fire he did not understand and burned a family to ash. King Rashid stood, his decision made. Jafaar, you have 3 days no longer. I give you until the moon is high tonight. Find this slave. Find the one who carries the third apple. For until he is found, justice is but a ghost in this city. Jafaar bowed low. I shall find him, Majesty. The apple itself will lead me. For such objects desire to be reunited, and I know exactly where to look. The vizier turned his gaze toward the shadows of the palace, his mind working furiously. The slave was described as tall, dark, and arrogant. He had money to spend on bribes. He had access to the market. A terrible suspicion began to bloom in Jafar's chest. A suspicion that the serpent lay not in the city streets, but coiled within his own house. Chapter 10. Fate, in its infinite and often cruel sense of irony, has a habit of hiding the key to the most complex locks within the pocket of the seeker himself. Jafaar al-Barmaki, the Grand Vizier of the Caliphate, walked the short distance from the palace to his own estate with the heavy tread of a man who has looked into the abyss, and stepped back only by the grace of a miracle. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of river mud and blooming jasmine, but Jafaar tasted only ash. He had been spared the executioner's sword, yet the weight of the investigation still pressed upon his shoulders like a yoke of lead. The true villain, The liar who had sparked the inferno with a single falsehood was still at large, a phantom in the crowded city. Jafaar passed through the high arched gates of his home, expecting the silence of a sleeping household. Instead, he found the inner courtyard alive with the soft glow of lanterns and the murmur of voices. His servants were awake, buzzing with the news of their master's narrow escape, preparing a late supper to celebrate his return. But Jafaar had no appetite for food or celebration. He longed only for the solitude of his chambers, to think, to plan, to find the thread that would lead him to the tall slave described by the wretched Arik. As he crossed the marble tiles toward the stairs, a flash of color caught his eye. It was a vibrant, unnatural red, dancing in the flickering light of an oil lamp near the fountain. Jafaar froze. His heart, which had just begun to settle, gave a violent lurch against his ribs. Sitting on the edge of the fountain, laughing with a casual arrogance, was Rayhan, his own personal slave. Rayhan was a man of imposing stature, tall and broad-shouldered, with skin like polished ebony, a description that matched Arik's testimony with terrifying precision. But it was not Rayhan's size that froze the blood in Jafar's veins. It was what he held in his hand. It was an apple, a crimson apple from Basra. Jafaar stared, unable to breathe. The fruit was the twin of the one found in the chest with the murdered Shivi. It pulsed with that same faint, malevolent light, a beacon of discord amidst the tranquility of the garden. Rayhan tossed the apple into the air, catching it with a practiced ease, while a younger servant girl looked on, giggling at his antics. "It is a rare prize, is it not?" Rayhan boasted, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard. "You will not find its like in the souk, little one. This is a fruit of kings, grown in the secret orchards of the south." Jafaar stepped out of the shadows, his movements stiff and predatory. "Rayhan," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The slave jumped, nearly dropping the fruit. He scrambled to his feet, bowing low, though the smirk did not entirely leave his face. "Master, praise be to Allah for your safety. We heard the criers say you were spared. We were just, where did you get that apple?" Jafaar interrupted, cutting through the pleasantries with the sharpness of a blade. He pointed a trembling finger at the fruit in Rayhan's hand. "Speak the truth, or by the one who created us, I will have your tongue." Rayhan blinked, confused by his master's intensity over a piece of fruit. He straightened, a look of smug satisfaction returning to his features. He assumed his master was merely impressed by his resourcefulness. "Ah, this?" Rayhan chuckled, tossing the apple lightly again. "It is a funny story, master. I have had it for 4 days now. I was walking through the alleyways of Kark, minding my own business, when I saw some children playing in the dust. One of them, a little boy, was holding this beauty. He was clutching it like it was gold." Jafaar felt the world tilt on its axis. The timeline, the location, the boy. "I went to him," Rayhan continued, oblivious to the storm gathering in Jafar's eyes, "and I snatched it from his hand. You should have heard him wail, master. He cried out, 'Oh, uncle, give it back. It belongs to my mother. She is sick, and my father rode all the way to Basra to buy 3 of them for her. Do not take it.'" Rayhan laughed, a cruel, hollow sound that echoed the tragedy of the last 3 days. I did not care for his tears. I gave him a cuff on the ear to silence him and walked away with my prize. Then I went to the market and showed it off to a fool of a merchant, telling him a fine tale about a mistress giving it to me for a kiss. You should have seen his face turn red. I believe I made him quite jealous. The confession was complete. The circle was closed. Jafaar stared at his slave with a mixture of horror and revulsion. Here stood the architect of the entire calamity. A petty theft, a child's tears ignored, a casual lie told for sport. These were the seeds that had grown into a murder, a threatened execution, and the near destruction of the Barmaki clan. "You," Jafaar whispered, his voice shaking with a rage he had never known before. "You stole it from a child. You lied to a husband. Do you know what you have done, Rayhan? Do you know the price of that apple?" Rayhan's smile faltered. He sensed finally that this was not a game. "Master, it is. It is just an apple. It is blood." Jafaar roared, lunging forward and seizing Rayhan by the collar of his tunic. He shook the large man with a strength born of fury. "That apple cost a woman her life. That apple nearly cost me my head. That apple has orphaned a child and destroyed a man's soul. And you stand here and laugh." Rayhan dropped the fruit. It rolled across the marble tiles, coming to a rest at Jafar's feet, innocent and damning. The slave's eyes went wide with terror as the realization of his folly crashed down upon him. He fell to his knees, grasping at Jafar's robes. "Mercy, master. I did not know. I was only jesting. I swear by the Prophet, I did not know." "Get up," Jafaar hissed, dragging the wailing slave to his feet. "Your jest has filled a chest with a corpse. We go to the Caliph, and you had best pray that his mercy is greater than mine. For at this moment, I would strike you down where you stand." With a grip of iron, Jafaar marched Rayhan out of the courtyard, back into the night, leaving the cursed apple lying alone by the fountain, its work finally done. Chapter 11. The journey back to the palace was a march of doom. Jafaar al-Barmaki, a man renowned for his patience and his cool intellect, gripped the collar of Rayhan's tunic with a hand that had turned into a claw of iron. He dragged the stumbling slave through the winding streets of Baghdad, not as a master leading a servant, but as a hunter dragging a carcass. The night air, usually filled with the sweet scent of jasmine and the distant strumming of lutes, now seemed to choke on the dust of their passage. Rayhan, whose laughter had rung so arrogantly in the courtyard only moments before, was now a portrait of abject terror. His legs, thick as tree trunks, shook so violently that he could barely keep his footing. As he was hauled over the cobblestones, the full weight of his folly crashed down upon him. It was not merely a stolen apple. It was not merely a lie told to a merchant for a moment of petty amusement. His words, light as feathers when they left his lips, had landed with the weight of mountains. A woman was dead, hacked to pieces in her own bed. A husband was broken, his soul incinerated by a magically amplified rage. And his own master, Jafaar, had stood within a breath of the executioner's blade. "Move, you wretched cur," Jafaar hissed, shoving Rayhan through the outer gates of the palace. The guards, seeing the fury in the Grand Vizier's eyes, parted instantly, their spears clattering against their shields in salute. They burst into the hall of audience. King Rashid had not moved from his throne. The torches had burned low, casting long, dancing shadows against the marble pillars. The Caliph sat in a pool of silence, the weight of the night's tragedy evident in the slump of his shoulders. Arik and Masum were gone, taken away to mourn or to face their own fates, leaving the king alone with his thoughts. Jafaar marched to the center of the room and threw Rayhan to the floor. The slave hit the stone with a heavy thud, scrambling immediately into a kneeling position, pressing his forehead to the cold ground. "Here is your culprit, O commander of the faithful," Jafaar announced, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Here is the spark that burned down the house of Arik. It was not a demon from the waste, nor a bandit from the hills. It was this fool, my own slave, Rayhan, King Rashid leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he looked down at the trembling figure. "This," the king asked, his voice low and incredulous. "This is the architect of such sorrow, a slave who played a game with a child's toy?" "He confessed to it all," Jafaar said, his chest heaving. "He stole the apple from Arik's son, and when the husband asked him of it, he lied. He claimed it was a gift from a mistress, a token of illicit love. He poured poison into a man's ear and called it a jest." King Rashid's face hardened into a mask of stone. The senselessness of the crime, the sheer triviality of the cause compared to the horror of the effect, ignited a cold fury in the monarch's heart. He stood up, the gold of his robes flashing in the torchlight. "For a lie that cost a life," King Rashid pronounced, his voice ringing like a judgment bell, "you shall pay with your own. You have made a mockery of justice and turned the city of peace into a slaughterhouse. Guards, take this man to the courtyard. Let his head be severed from his body, that the scales may be balanced." Two burly Mamluk guards stepped forward, their hands reaching for Rayhan. The slave let out a wail of despair, a sound so raw it made the very air shiver. "Mercy, O King of the Age, mercy!" Rayhan screamed, scrambling backward on his knees. "I am a fool, yes. I am a liar, yes. But I am not a murderer by intent. Do not kill me for a mistake." "The woman is dead regardless of your intent," King Rashid said coldly. "Take him away." "Wait," Rayhan cried, his eyes wide and frantic, darting from the king to Jafaar. "Spare me, and I will give you something greater than my blood. I will give you a story. I will tell you the truth of the apple." King Rashid paused. He was a man of great wisdom, but he was also a man with a voracious appetite for tales. He raised a hand, halting the guards. "A story?" the king asked. "What story could possibly weigh as much as your life?" Rayhan gulped, sweat pouring down his face like rain. "The apple, O king, you saw it, you felt its power. It is not just fruit, it is cursed. It has a history that spans generations and defies the laws of nature. It did not just grow in Basra. Its seed came from a place of magic, carried by the winds of destiny." Rayhan looked up, his eyes pleading. "If you kill me, the secret of the apple dies with me. But if you spare me, if you grant me my life, I will tell you the tale of Nur al-Din. I will tell you of his brother, Shams al-Din, and the great King Vendan of Egypt. I will tell you how the Jinn interfered in the affairs of men to bring that apple into existence." Jafaar looked at the king. The vizier's anger had not cooled, but his curiosity was piqued. He knew his master well. King Rashid could resist gold, he could resist armies, but he could never resist a story that promised to reveal the hidden workings of the world. The tale of Nur al-Din, King Rashid mused, sitting back slowly upon his throne. "I have heard the name, but not the tale. It is a tale of wonder, majesty," Rayhan gasped, sensing a glimmer of hope. "A tale of brothers separated by pride, of a wedding orchestrated by spirits, and of a hunchback groom. It explains why the apple drove Arik to madness. It explains everything." The king stroked his beard, silence stretching out in the great hall. Finally, he looked down at the slave. "Very well," King Rashid said. "The night is long and sleep has fled from me. Speak, Rayhan, tell your tale, but know this: if it does not entertain, if it does not explain, or if it falters in truth, the sword awaits you at the end of the final sentence." Rayhan slumped in relief, then straightened his back, taking the deep breath of a man who has been granted a reprieve on the edge of the abyss. He looked at the torches, gathering his thoughts, and began to weave the tapestry of the past, transporting the court from the bloody floors of Baghdad to the distant past where the seeds of fate were first sown. Chapter 12. The silence that filled the grand hall of audience was not the peaceful silence of the night, but the suffocating stillness that precedes the fall of the axe. The torchlight flickered against the high stone walls, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock the mortal drama unfolding below. Rayhan, the slave whose careless tongue had severed the thread of a woman's life, knelt upon the cold marble, his breath coming in ragged, terrified gasps. On either side of him stood a Mamluk guard, their faces impassive masks of duty, hands resting heavily upon the pommels of their curved scimitars. They waited only for the lift of a finger from King Rashid to drag the condemned man to the courtyard of blood. King Rashid sat upon the emerald throne, a figure of terrible judgment. His eyes, usually bright with the light of wisdom and humor, were now dark pools of unforgiving granite. He looked at Rayhan not as a man, but as a cancer that had infected his city, a blight that needed to be excised to restore the balance of justice. Beside the throne, Jafaar al-Barmaki stood with his arms crossed, his face a mixture of lingering fury and exhaustion. He had served his master well, solving the riddle of the three apples, but the answer had brought him only shame. The time for words is at an end, King Rashid declared, his voice echoing through the vast chamber like a gavel striking iron. You have confessed to the lie. You have admitted to the theft. The blood of the innocent cries out from the Tigris, and it shall be answered with your own. Guards, take him. The heavy hands of the Mamluks clamped down on Rayhan's shoulders. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over him. But in that final moment, as the abyss yawned open to swallow him, a spark of desperate inspiration ignited in his mind. He remembered the apple the way it glowed, the way it felt heavy with a history that was not of this earth. He remembered the whispers he had heard in the sucks, old tales of how such fruits came to be. Wait, Rayhan screamed, digging his heels into the cracks of the marble floor. Wait, O Prince of the Faithful, do not silence a tongue that holds a secret greater than this crime. Strike me down, and you bury the truth of the curse forever. King Rashid raised a hand, halting the guards with a sharp gesture. He leaned forward, the granite in his eyes softening just enough to reveal the glint of a scholar's curiosity. You speak of secrets, slave. You grasp at straws to stay the blade. Not straws, Majesty. Roots. Rayhan cried, his voice trembling but gaining strength. The apple, the crimson fruit that drove the husband Arik to madness. Do you think it was mere jealousy that turned a loving man into a butcher? No, it was the apple itself. It was the seed of discord planted by the Jinn. Jafaar stepped forward, his interest piqued despite his anger. Explain yourself, the vizier commanded. I will, master, I will. Rayhan gasped, scrambling to face the king. That apple is not of the common earth. It is the fruit of a tree planted by fate, watered by the tears of separated brothers, and ripened by the magic of the Ifrit. To understand why it holds such power over the heart, you must know where it came from. You must know the tale of Nur al-Din and his brother Shams al-Din. King Rashid sat back, his fingers drumming rhythmically on the arm of the throne. He was a ruler who prized justice, but he was also a man who lived for the wonder of a well-spun tale. He knew that the world was woven from stories, and that sometimes the truth was stranger than any fiction. The tale of Nur al-Din, the king mused, testing the name on his tongue. I have heard whispers of such men, ancient viziers of Cairo and Basra. You claim their history is the origin of this bloody fruit. I swear it by the tombs of my ancestors, Rayhan promised, sensing the door to life cracking open. It is a story of high adventure, O king. a story of two brothers who quarreled over the hypothetical marriages of their unborn children. It is a story of great King Vendan, the Sultan of Egypt, and his cruel vizier. It tells of a wedding night orchestrated by a powerful Jinniya and a married Ifrit, where a noble son was swapped with the hideous hunchback of Caparaso. The apple, my king, the apple is the legacy of that night. The mention of the supernatural, of Ifrits, and magic, and twisted fates, ensnared the king's imagination. The anger in the room began to recede, replaced by the hushed anticipation of a campfire circle. King Rashid looked at Jafaar, and a silent understanding passed between them. The execution could wait. The story could not. Very well, King Rashid decreed, waving the guards back to their posts. I grant you this reprieve, Rayhan, but know this, I am a connoisseur of tales. If your story is dull, if it lacks the flavor of truth, or if it fails to explain the curse of the apple, the sun shall not set on you tomorrow. You have bought this night with your words. Spend them wisely. Rayhan slumped in relief, wiping the cold sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his tunic. He took a deep breath, composing himself. He was no longer a condemned slave. He was a narrator, holding the attention of the most powerful man in the world. He closed his eyes for a moment, summoning the ghosts of the past. And when he opened them, the fear was gone, replaced by the gleam of the storyteller. Listen then, O King of the Age, Rayhan began, his voice taking on a melodic, rhythmic cadence. And marvel at the mysterious ways of destiny. For our story begins not in Baghdad, but many years ago, in the ancient and dusty court of a wise vizier who had two sons. Chapter 13. The torches in the hall of audience flickered, casting long, dancing shadows against the marble pillars as Rayhan, the condemned slave, cleared his throat. He looked up at King Rashid, seeing the glint of curiosity in the monarch's eyes, a lifeline he intended to grasp with both hands. With the practiced cadence of a street performer, Rayhan transported the court from the tense silence of Baghdad to a land of golden sands and ancient rivers. Know, O Prince of the Faithful, Rayhan began, his voice growing steady and resonant, that this tale does not begin with an apple, nor with a murder. It begins with love between brothers, in the majestic land of Egypt, under the rule of the Sultan known as Great King Vendan. In the city of Cairo, there lived a wise and noble Grand Vizier who had two sons. The elder was named Shams al-Din, a man of serious countenance and rigid pride. The younger was Nur al-Din, a youth of beauty, spirit, and a heart as open as the sky. When their father passed into the mercy of the almighty, great King Vendan, seeing their bond and their talent, appointed them both to take their father's place. They were to be joint viziers, two bodies with one authority, ruling side by side. Rayhan paused for effect, letting the image settle. For many years, they were inseparable. They ate from the same plate, drank from the same cup, and rode the same steed. The people of Cairo said that to see one was to see the other, like a reflection in a mirror. But, O King, the seed of discord is often small, buried in the soil of casual conversation. One evening, Rayhan continued, painting the scene with his hands. The two brothers sat in the private gardens of their palace, enjoying the cool breeze of the Nile. They had feasted and drunk sweet sherbet, and their hearts were light. They began to speak of the future, as men often do when the world is quiet. Brother, said Shams al-Din the elder, I have a thought. Since we are equal in all things, let us marry two sisters on the same night. And let us pray to Allah that our wives conceive on the same night and give birth on the same day. Nur al-Din smiled, delighted by the symmetry of the idea. An excellent plan, brother, and let us go further. If fate blesses us, and one of us has a son and the other a daughter, let us betroth them to one another, so our bloodline remains pure and our bond eternal. Shams al-Din stroked his beard, his face growing stern. If I have a daughter, he said slowly, and you have a son, I will indeed allow the marriage. But I shall demand a heavy dowry from your son. He must pay 3,000 gold dinars, 3 gardens, and 3 farms. And furthermore, on the wedding night, your son must stand before my daughter as a servant stands before a queen. For I am the elder brother, and my daughter shall be superior to your son. Rayhan lowered his voice, mimicking the shock of the younger brother. Nur al-Din stared at Shams al-Din, the smile vanishing from his lips. What is this talk, brother? Nur asked. We are brothers. We are joint viziers. Why would you demand a dowry as if we were strangers haggling in the souk? And why would you humiliate my son, who is your own nephew, by making him a servant to his wife? Are we not equals? Is a male not superior to a female by the laws of nature? Shams al-Din's pride flared like dry tinder. You question me? He snapped. I am the elder. My word is law in this family. Your son shall be a slave to my daughter, or there shall be no marriage at all. In fact, he is not worthy to kiss the hem of her robe. You speak foolishness. Nur al-Din retorted, his own temper rising. We speak of children who are not yet conceived, yet you weave chains of iron for them. You have forgotten that we are partners, not master and servant. The argument grew hot. O king, Rayhan narrated, his eyes wide. Voices were raised. The peace of the garden was shattered. Insults were traded like blows in a duel. Finally, Shams al-Din, consumed by a petty and tyrannical rage, stood up and struck his younger brother across the face. Be silent, Shams roared. I swear by the ancient stones of Egypt that I will never marry my daughter to your son. I would rather marry her to the lowest creature in the kingdom than to the offspring of such an insolent whelp. Nur al-Din held his cheek, tears of betrayal stinging his eyes. He looked at the man who had been his other half and saw only a stranger masked in pride. And I, Nur al-Din whispered, his voice trembling with a cold resolve, swear that I shall not remain in a city where my own brother treats me with such disdain. I will leave this place. I will travel the world, and I will not return until I have made a life far from your shadow. That very night, Rayhan concluded this chapter of the tale. Nur al-Din gathered his gold and his jewels. He saddled his fastest mule and rode out of Cairo under the cover of darkness, leaving behind his title, his home, and the brother he had loved. He rode north, toward the lands of Syria and Iraq, carrying nothing but a broken heart and a destiny that would eventually lead to the birth of the Crimson Apple. Thus, the brothers were separated by a hypothetical quarrel over children who did not exist, a folly that would echo through time. Chapter 14. Words, Rayhan continued, his voice echoing in the hushed throne room of Baghdad, are like arrows. Once loosed from the bow of the tongue, they can never be recalled, and they strike with a poison that festers long after the wound has closed. So it was with the brothers Shams al-Din and Nur al-Din in the ancient gardens of Cairo. The rift began with a hypothetical dowry, a mere fancy of the mind, yet it grew into a chasm that would swallow their brotherhood whole. Shams al-Din, his face flushed with the arrogance of the elder, paced the garden path, his robes swishing angrily against the blooming jasmine. You speak of equality, Shams al-Din sneered, yet you offer a pittance for the hand of my daughter, a daughter who will carry the blood of the senior vizier. Know your place, brother. My child shall be a jewel of the Nile, while yours will be but a stone from the desert. Rayhan raised a hand, illustrating the scene for the rapt Caliph. Nur al-Din sat upon the marble bench, stunned by the venom in his brother's voice. He had expected banter, perhaps a friendly wager, not this cold, calculating disdain. "Brother," Nur al-Din pleaded, his voice cracking, "why do you poison the future before it is even born? We are of one blood. Our children will be cousins. Why must there be master and servant between them? Why must there be gold and debts? Is love not enough?" "Love," Shams al-Din laughed, a harsh sound that startled the roosting birds. "Love is for poets and fools. Kings and viziers deal in power and respect, and you, little brother, show me neither. If you cannot see that my lineage takes precedence, then you are blind as well as foolish. I repeat my oath, I will never give my daughter to your son, not for all the gold in Solomon's mines." The insult struck Nur al-Din to the core. Rayhan narrated, his expression somber. It was not just the refusal, it was the contempt. The realization that the brother he idolized saw him as lesser, as unworthy. A cold resolve settled over Nur al-Din's heart, freezing the warmth of their lifelong bond. He stood up, brushing the petals from his tunic. He did not shout. He did not rage. He spoke with the quiet finality of a judge passing a death sentence. "Then let it be so," Nur al-Din said softly. "You have drawn a line in the sand, Shams al-Din. You have chosen pride over brotherhood. You cling to your seniority as a shield, but you will find it is a lonely wall. I will not stay to be insulted. I will not stay to see my unborn children mocked. The world is wide, and Allah provides for the patient." Shams al-Din turned his back, crossing his arms. "Go then, seek your fortune in the dust. See if the world treats you with the indulgence I have shown." Without another word, Rayhan whispered, Nur al-Din turned and walked away. He did not look back at the garden where they had played as children. He did not look back at the palace where they had ruled as equals. He went to his chambers, gathered a small bag of gold dinars, and took only what he could carry. He saddled his mule, a sturdy beast named Patience, and under the cloak of a moonless night, he rode out of the great gates of Cairo. As he crossed the desert, with the wind howling like a mournful spirit, Nur al-Din made a silent vow. He would go to Basra. He would rise by his own merits. He would marry, and he would have a son. And he prayed, oh, how he prayed, that his son would be a prince among men, a beacon of virtue that would shame the arrogance of his uncle. He did not know, O king, that the Jinn of the desert were listening to his silent prayers, and that the stars were aligning to grant his wish in a way he could never have imagined. Thus the brothers were severed, Rayhan concluded, looking at King Rashid. One remained in Cairo, nursing his pride and his anger. The other rode toward Basra, carrying the seeds of a destiny that would one day birth a crimson apple and a tragedy in Baghdad. But before the apple could grow, a new generation had to be born. Chapter 15. And so, Rayhan continued, his hands weaving the air as if pulling threads from the tapestry of time. Nur al-Din rode away from the city of 1,000 minarets. The Nile, which had nurtured him from infancy, became a silver ribbon fading in the moonlight behind him. Ahead lay only the vast, indifferent emptiness of the desert, a realm where silence reigned, and the stars watched with cold, unblinking eyes. His journey was not one of days, but of moons. He traversed the shifting sands where the dunes sang with the voices of lost travelers. He crossed the rocky plateaus of Sinai, where the wind sharpened the stones into knives. He drank from bitter wells and slept under the shelter of scraggly palms, his only companion the steady rhythm of his mule's hooves and the burning ember of his resolve. Yet, in this solitude, Nur al-Din did not wither. Instead, he was forged. The desert stripped away the softness of the palace life, leaving behind a man of steel and spirit. Finally, after weeks of travel, the scent of the air changed. The dry dust gave way to the humid kiss of the marshes. The horizon, once flat and brown, erupted into a riot of green. He had reached the great rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, and there, nestled like a pearl in an oyster, lay the city of Basra. Basra, Rayhan exclaimed, his voice filled with wonder. A city of canals and commerce, where ships from the Indies docked laden with spices and silks. It was a place of vibrant chaos, a stark contrast to the rigid order of Cairo. Nur al-Din entered the city gates not as a vizier's son, but as a stranger, his robes dusty and his face hidden by a traveler's cowl. But charisma, O king, is a light that cannot be hidden under a bushel. He found lodging in a modest khan, but it was not long before his nature revealed itself. In the coffee houses and the mosques, men were drawn to him. He spoke with the eloquence of a poet and the wisdom of a sage. He could debate theology with the imams and discuss trade routes with the merchants. Word of this brilliant stranger reached the ears of the Grand Vizier of Basra, a man grown old in service, who had no son to lean upon. One day, the vizier sent for Nur al-Din. The young man arrived at the palace, bathed and dressed in fresh linen, his noble bearing unmistakable. The vizier looked at him and saw not a wanderer, but a mirror of his own younger self. They spoke for hours of statecraft and philosophy, of history and the stars. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the vizier knew he had found a gem. "My son," the old vizier said, placing a hand on Nur al-Din's shoulder, "fate has been cruel to deny me an heir of my own blood, but it has been kind to send you to my door. I have a daughter, fair of face and pure of heart. If you would consent, I would give her to you in marriage, and you shall be as a son to me." Nur al-Din bowed low, his heart swelling with gratitude. He saw in this offer not just advancement, but a divine validation of his choice to leave Cairo. He accepted, and the wedding was celebrated with a grandeur that shook the city. Drums beat, flutes sang, and the streets were awash with feasts for the poor. Nur al-Din, the exile, had become a prince of Basra. And true to the whimsical nature of destiny, Rayhan added with a knowing smile, on the very night of his wedding, hundreds of leagues away in Cairo, his brother Shams al-Din also took a wife. The two brothers, separated by pride and distance, lay with their brides under the same moon. And as they had once planned in the garden, their wives conceived on that very night. Time flowed like the river. 9 months passed, and 2 cries were heard in 2 different cities. In Cairo, Shams al-Din was presented with a daughter, beautiful as the dawn, whom he named Sit al-Husn, the Lady of Beauty. In Basra, Nur al-Din held in his arms a son, a boy with eyes like dark stars, whom he named Badr al-Din, the full moon of the faith. "The die was cast, O king," Rayhan whispered. The children of the oath were born, but unlike the brothers' plan, they were now strangers, separated by a world of silence. Yet, the blood that flowed in their veins called out across the deserts. The story of the apple was beginning to take root, for it is said that true love, like a river, will always find its way to the sea, no matter how many dams of pride are built to stop it. Chapter 16. In the perfumed gardens of Basra, where the waterways whispered secrets to the swaying palms, Nur al-Din found a happiness that almost eclipsed the sorrow of his exile. His wife, the daughter of the vizier, was a woman of grace and wisdom, and their union was blessed by the heavens. When their son was born, The midwives gasped, for the child's beauty was like a lamp illuminated in the darkness. His skin held the luster of moonlight on the river, and his eyes were deep pools of intelligent obsidian. Nur al-Din named him Badr al-Din, the full moon of the faith, a name that would one day ring out in the courts of kings and the dens of jinns. As the boy grew, so too did a peculiar tree in the center of Nur al-Din's private courtyard. It was an apple tree, yet unlike any other in the orchard. Its bark was dark as iron, and its leaves shimmered with a faint, restless energy. It had sprung from a seed carried in the lining of Nur al-Din's cloak, a seed he had unknowingly brought from the very garden in Cairo, where he had quarreled with his brother. The tree bore no fruit for many years, standing silent and brooding, drinking in the sun and the moon, waiting for a time that only fate knew. Nur al-Din watched his son flourish, learning the arts of the sword and the pen with equal ease. But a shadow lay over the father's heart. He knew that life was as fragile as a spider's web, and that his own time was measured. He thought often of his brother, Shams al-Din, and the blood tie that had been severed by pride. He feared that Badr al-Din would grow up an orphan of history, ignorant of his noble lineage and his kin in distant Egypt. So, on nights when the city slept, and the only sound was the scratching of the quill, Nur al-Din began to write. He took a notebook bound in soft leather and filled its pages with the truth. He wrote of his father, the great vizier of Cairo. He wrote of his brother, Shams, and the love they had shared before the poison of arrogance tainted their bond. He wrote of their argument, recording the date and the words spoken in anger. He detailed his journey across the deserts, his arrival in Basra, and his rise to power. "My son," he wrote, the ink staining the page like tears, "know that you are not alone in this world. You have an uncle, a man of power and pride, who rules in the land of the Nile. Though we are estranged, blood is a river that cannot be dammed forever. Keep this book. Let it be your compass if ever the storms of life cast you adrift." He hid the notebook in a secret compartment of a chest, intending to give it to Badr al-Din when the boy became a man. But destiny, impatient and capricious, often moves the hands of the clock forward. When Badr al-Din was 20, a youth of breathtaking splendor, Nur al-Din fell ill. It was not a sickness of the body, but a weariness of the soul, as if the thread of his life had simply run its course. He called his son to his bedside. The room was dim, lit only by a single oil lamp that cast long shadows on the walls. "My son," Nur al-Din whispered, his voice thin as parchment, "the angel of death stands at the door, and I must answer his knock. But before I go, listen well. In the chest at the foot of my bed, hidden beneath the silks, is a book. It contains your history. It tells you who you are and where you come from. Guard it with your life, for a man without a past is a tree without roots." Badr al-Din wept, clutching his father's cold hand. "Do not leave me, father. I am not ready to walk this path alone." "You are never alone," Nur al-Din replied, his eyes drifting to the window where the strange apple tree stood silhouetted against the moon. "The world is full of mysteries, my son. Trust in Allah and remember. Pride is a wall, but humility is a bridge. Do not make the mistake your father made." With those final words, Nur al-Din breathed his last. The city of Basra mourned their adopted son, and Badr al-Din, now the vizier in his father's place, sat in the house of grieving. But in the courtyard, the iron-barked apple tree suddenly burst into bloom. Its flowers were not white, but a deep blood red, signaling that the first act of the tragedy was over, and the second, filled with magic and madness, was about to begin. The legacy of the brothers was no longer ink on a page. It was alive and it was hungry. Chapter 17. While the winds of fate blew softly through the gardens of Basra, nurturing the orphan Badr al-Din, a storm was brewing across the sands in the ancient land of Egypt. Rayhan, the storyteller whose life hung by the thread of this very tale, turned his gaze to King Rashid and raised a hand, sweeping it through the air, as if parting the curtains of time to reveal the bustling, golden city of Cairo. In that city, Shams al-Din, the elder brother who had driven his kin away with harsh words and wounded pride, had risen to the pinnacle of power. He was the Grand Vizier to the Sultan of Egypt, a ruler known as Great King Vendan. Shams al-Din was a man of steel and stone, respected by all for his intellect, yet feared for his rigid demeanor. He walked through the corridors of power with a heavy heart, for though he had wealth and authority, the silence of his brother's absence haunted him like a ghost. He had no son to carry his name, but Allah had blessed him with a daughter of such transcendent beauty that the poets of the Nile claimed the moon itself would hide behind a cloud in shame whenever she walked upon her terrace. Her name was Sit al-Husn, the Lady of Beauty. She was the counterpart to her cousin in Basra, though neither knew of the other's existence. Her eyes were large and dark, like the pools of an oasis at midnight, and her laughter was the sound of silver bells ringing in a gentle breeze. Shams al-Din loved her with a fierce, possessive love, seeing in her the only softness remaining in his hard life. He guarded her jealously, keeping her hidden from the prying eyes of the court, wishing to keep her pure and untouched by the intrigues of the palace. But beauty, O commander of the faithful, is like a fire on a mountaintop. It cannot be hidden forever. Whispers of Sit al-Husn's radiance escaped the high walls of the vizier's estate. They traveled through the souks and the bathhouses, eventually reaching the ears of Great King Vendan himself. The Sultan was a man of immense appetite and power, accustomed to plucking whatever flower pleased him from the garden of his empire. Upon hearing the tales of her perfection, a desire ignited within him to possess this jewel for his own harem. One afternoon, as the heat of the day began to wane, Great King Vendan summoned Shams al-Din to the Hall of Pillars. The Sultan sat upon a throne of ivory and gold, surrounded by fan-bearers and guards. He smiled as his vizier approached, a smile that did not quite reach his predatory eyes. Shams al-Din, approach, the Sultan commanded, his voice booming like distant thunder. I have heard talk of a treasure you keep hidden in your house. They say your daughter, Sit al-Husn, is a vision of paradise. Since I am the shadow of God upon this earth, it is only fitting that such perfection resides within my palace. I hereby ask for her hand in marriage. Prepare her, for the wedding shall be soon. Shams al-Din stood rigid, his face paling. He looked at the Sultan, a man 3 times the girl's age, a ruler known for his fickle affections. The pride that had once caused him to spurn his own brother now flared up in defense of his daughter. He saw her not as a tribute to be paid to a king, but as a tender shoot not yet ready for the harsh sun. O King of the age, Shams al-Din replied, bowing low but keeping his voice steady, pardon your servant, but my daughter is yet a child. She has seen but few summers. She is unlearned in the ways of women and the duties of a queen. She is a pearl still forming in the shell. To pluck her now would be to ruin the fruit before it ripens. I beg you, let her remain in my care until she is of an age to bear the weight of your crown. Great King Vendan's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a scowl that darkened the entire hall. The court held its breath. To refuse the Sultan was dangerous. To imply that his bed was a burden was treason. "You refuse me?" The Sultan whispered, a dangerous edge to his tone. "You, whom I raised to this station, do you think your daughter too precious for the Sultan of Egypt? Do you think your blood is superior to mine? It is not pride, Majesty, but a father's concern," Shams al-Din insisted, though the ghost of his old arrogance lingered in his stance. "She is not ready." The Sultan slammed his fist against the arm of his throne. "You lie, Vizier. I see the haughtiness in your eyes. You think yourself above your master. You denied your own brother years ago, and now you seek to deny your king. Very well, if she is too good for the Sultan, then let us see how she fares with the lowest of the low." Great King Vendan stood up, his robes swirling with his fury. "You say she is not ready for a king? Then she shall marry a monster. I swear by the sun and the sands that before this moon wanes, I will wed your precious Sit, Al-Hassan, to the most wretched, hideous creature I can find in all of Cairo. And you, Shams al-Din, shall witness it and weep for your insolence." The Sultan stormed out of the hall, leaving Shams al-Din standing alone in the vast, echoing chamber. The vizier trembled, not with fear for himself, but with the crushing realization that his pride had once again summoned a catastrophe. He had thought to protect his daughter, but instead he had doomed her. And somewhere in the shadows of the city, fate was already preparing the instrument of the king's revenge. A stable groom known only as the Hunchback of Caparaso. Chapter 18. As the wheel of fortune turned in Cairo, Rayhan continued, his voice deepening with the gravity of the tale. The sands of time were running out in Basra. Nur al-Din, once the vibrant exile who had charmed a city, now lay upon his bed, his strength fading like the light of the setting sun. The years had been kind to his legacy, but harsh to his body. He felt the cold breath of the angel of death upon his cheek, and he knew that his journey was nearing its end. He called for his son, Badr al-Din. The young man entered the chamber, his face a mask of sorrow, for the bond between father and son was as strong as iron. Badr al-Din knelt by the bedside, taking his father's withered hand in his own, tears streaming down his face like rain upon a parched field. "Weep not, my son," Nur al-Din whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "For death is a cup that all men must drink. It is the gate through which we all must pass. But listen to me, for my time is short, and the world is full of snares for the unwary." With trembling hands, Nur al-Din reached beneath his pillow and withdrew the leather-bound notebook he had guarded for so many years. He pressed it into Badr al-Din's hands. "This book contains your history, Badr. It tells of your lineage, of your uncle Shams al-Din in Cairo, and of the noble blood that flows in your veins. Guard it with your life. Let it be a lantern in the darkness. Do not forget who you are, for a man without a past is a ship without a rudder." Nur al-Din coughed, a racking sound that shook his frail frame. He gripped his son's hand tighter. "Beware the treachery of men, my son. Do not trust easily. Do not let pride blind you as it blinded my brother. And above all, seek connection. The world is vast, but blood calls to blood. Promise me you will remember." "I promise, father," Badr al-Din sobbed, pressing the book to his heart. "I will honor your memory. I will walk the path of righteousness." Nur al-Din smiled, a peaceful expression settling over his features. He looked out the window one last time, toward the garden where the strange, iron-barked apple tree stood vigil in the moonlight. "Good," he breathed. "Then I go to my rest." And with a final, shuddering sigh, the soul of Nur al-Din departed from the earth, leaving behind a legacy of love and a seed of destiny waiting to bloom. the city of Basra mourned their vizier for 40 days and 40 nights. The souks were silent, and the mosques echoed with prayers for the departed. But none mourned deeper than Badr al-Din. He withdrew from the world, shunning the company of the court and the duties of his new station. He spent his days and nights in the cemetery, sitting by the marble tomb of his father, reading the notebook over and over until the words were etched into his soul. He slept on the cold stone, oblivious to the changing seasons, a figure of tragic beauty lost in grief. He did not know that his sorrow was a beacon. He did not know that in the unseen world, eyes were watching him. High above the cemetery, in the swirling currents of the air, powerful entities were drawn to his despair and his radiant beauty. An Ifrit, a massive spirit of fire and smoke, and a Jinniya, a creature of wind and whimsy, hovered in the darkness, looking down at the weeping youth. "Look at him," the Jinniya whispered, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "Have you ever seen a human of such perfection? Even in his grief, he shines like the moon." "He is indeed fair," the Ifrit grumbled, his voice a low rumble of thunder. "But beauty is common among mortals. Sorrow is their true currency. Still, there is something about him, a destiny that smells of old magic." Unaware of the supernatural audience floating above him, Badr al-Din wept on, clutching the notebook that linked him to a past he had never known and a future he could not imagine. The stage was set. The players were assembling. And the magic that had been dormant since the brothers parted ways in Cairo was about to awaken with a force that would shake the foundations of two cities. Chapter 19. While the mortal world slumbered, wrapped in the ignorance of dreams, the graveyard of Basra became a theater for beings woven of smokeless fire. The Jinniya, a creature of ethereal grace whose form shimmered like a mirage, drifted closer to the sleeping Badr al-Din. She hovered over his tear-streaked face, marveling at the symmetry of his features, the arch of his brow, and the tragic nobility that clung to him even in exhaustion. She had roamed the earth for centuries, seen the rise and fall of empires, but rarely had she encountered a human who shone with such an inner luminescence. Suddenly, the air grew heavy and hot. The ground trembled slightly as a shadow darker than the night coalesced beside her. It was the Ifrit, a Marid of immense power, his skin like basalt and his eyes burning like embers. He had just returned from a flight across the great deserts, having spent the evening hovering unseen in the palaces of Cairo. "Well met, sister of the wind," the Ifrit rumbled, his voice a low growl that vibrated in the stones. "What holds your fascination in this place of bones?" "Look," the Jinniya whispered, pointing a slender, translucent finger at the sleeping youth. "Behold the most beautiful creature Allah has ever fashioned from clay. Is he not like the full moon rising over a dark sea? I have watched him for hours, and my heart aches with his sorrow." The Ifrit leaned down, his massive face inches from Badr al-Din. He sniffed the air, smelling the salt of tears, and the faint scent of old paper from the notebook clutched in the boy's hand. He straightened up, letting out a snort of dismissal that sent a puff of sulfur into the night air. "He is fair enough for a male," the Ifrit conceded grudgingly. "But you speak with the ignorance of one who has not traveled far this night. I have just come from Cairo, the city of the victorious. There, hidden behind 7 veils in the harem of the Grand Vizier Shams al-Din, lies a maiden who puts the stars to shame. Her name is Sit al-Husn, the Lady of Beauty, and compared to her, this boy is but a candle held against the sun." The Jinniya's eyes flashed with indignation. "You speak madness, brother of smoke. I tell you, there is no beauty on earth that can rival this youth. His eyelashes alone are enough to snare the hearts of queens. And I tell you, the Ifrit countered, his voice rising, that the girl in Cairo is the zenith of creation. Her hair is like the night, her skin like cream, and her lips like rose petals. Even the Sultan, great King Vendan, is mad with desire for her, though her father refuses to give her up. In fact, the Ifrit chuckled darkly. Fate has played a cruel joke on her. The Sultan, in his rage at being refused, has sworn to marry her this very night to a stable groom, a hideous creature known as the Hunchback of Caparaso. A hunchback, the Jinnia gasped, horrified. To marry such beauty to a monster? That is a crime against nature. It is the will of a petty king, the Ifrit shrugged. But her beauty remains, even in her despair, and it far surpasses this weeping boy. The two spirits glared at one another, the air between them crackling with magical tension. Neither would yield. For the Jinn, pride is sustenance, and to be proven wrong is a hunger they cannot bear. We shall see who is right, the Jinnia declared, her voice sharp as crystal. I challenge you, Ifrit. Let us not waste breath on idle boasts. Let us bring them together. Fly to Cairo. Snatch this Sit al-Husn from her wedding chamber and bring her here, to this very spot. Let us lay them side by side, asleep, and judge them fairly. If she is indeed fairer, I will acknowledge your wisdom. But if this youth outshines her, you must bow to mine. The Ifrit grinned, revealing teeth like jagged obsidians. A wager worthy of our kind, I accept. I shall bring the girl, and we shall see whose champion wears the crown of beauty. Stay here, sister, and guard your prize. I return on the wings of the storm. With a roar that sounded like a sudden gale, the Ifrit shot upward into the sky, vanishing toward the west. The Jinnia settled back onto a tombstone, gazing fondly at Badr al-Din, smoothing his hair with an invisible touch. The game was afoot. Two cousins, separated by birth and distance, were about to be reunited by the vanity of spirits, their fates colliding in a slumbering duel of perfection. Chapter 20. The night air over the deserts of Arabia was thin and cold, a realm where only the stars and the spirits dared to wander. But on this night, the silence of the high altitudes was broken by the rush of supernatural wings. The Jinnia, true to her wager, had woven a spell of deep slumber around Badr al-Din. She lifted him from the cold earth of the Basra cemetery, as effortlessly as a mother lifts a sleeping babe. He floated in her arms, wrapped in his mourning robes, his chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that defied the impossible journey he was undertaking. Beside her, the Ifrit returned from Cairo, carrying his own burden, though his travel was far swifter, bending the very fabric of distance to his will. Instead of bringing the girl to the graveyard, he had seen the preparations for the wedding and realized the folly of moving her amidst such chaos. Change of plan, sister, he bellowed over the wind. The girl is surrounded by guards and wailing women. If we take her, the alarm will be raised. Let us instead take the boy to her. The pavilion in Cairo is ready for a wedding. Let us give them a groom worthy of the bride. The Jinnia laughed, a sound like tinkling glass. Agreed. To Cairo, then. They sped westward, crossing the great rivers, the Zagros Mountains, and the endless dunes of the Sinai. The world below was a patchwork of shadows and moonlight, cities reduced to glowing embers in the dark. Badr al-Din slept on, dreaming perhaps of his father, or of the strange apple tree in his garden, unaware that he was flying faster than an arrow toward a destiny written before his birth. In the blink of an eye, or what seemed like hours to a mortal, they arrived over the sprawling metropolis of Cairo. The city was alive with lights, torches flickering along the Nile like a reflection of the Milky Way. The Ifrit guided them toward the palace of the Grand Vizier, Shams al-Din. There, in a grand pavilion set apart from the main house, the wedding preparations for the ill-fated Sit al-Husn were underway. The spirits descended, becoming invisible as they passed through the silk walls of the pavilion. Inside, the scene was one of opulent despair. Sit al-Husn sat upon a dais, adorned in robes of gold and pearls, her face hidden behind a veil of intricate lace, but her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and the women attending her wept openly, cursing the Sultan's cruelty. In the corner, ignored and reviled, sat the intended groom, the hunchback of Caparaso. He was a creature to be pitied, twisted of spine and dull of wit, dressed in finery that only mocked his deformity. He sat picking at a tray of sweets, oblivious to the tragedy of which he was the center. The Jinniya and the Ifrit hovered in the rafters, unseen. Now, the Ifrit whispered, "Watch this." With a flick of his wrist, the Ifrit cast a spell upon the hunchback. The groom's head lolled forward, and within seconds, he was snoring loudly, a deep, unnatural sleep that no amount of shaking would disturb. The Ifrit then lifted the hunchback with a thought, floating him out of the room and depositing him unceremoniously in a nearby stable, head down in a pile of hay. The stage is cleared, the Ifrit grinned. "Place your champion." The Jinniya gently lowered Badr al-Din onto the cushions beside the weeping bride. She adjusted his robes, smoothed his hair, and then, with a mischievous glint in her eye, she lifted the veil from Sit al-Husn's face. The two cousins lay side by side. Badr al-Din, the full moon of the faith, and Sit al-Husn, the lady of beauty. The resemblance was striking, undeniable. They shared the same high cheekbones, the same dark, intelligent eyes, though Badr's were closed, and the same aura of noble grace. They were like two halves of a single soul, separated by a sea of pride and reunited by a whim of magic. The Ifrit and the Jinniya hovered close, comparing them feature by feature. "His nose is straighter," the Jinniya whispered. "Her lips are fuller," the Ifrit countered. "His brow is more noble. Her skin is more luminous." They argued back and forth, unable to decide. Finally, the Jinniya sighed. "They are equal in perfection. It is a draw, brother, but look, the spell on the boy is lifting. He wakes." Indeed, the magic of the transport was fading. Badr al-Din stirred. The scent of jasmine and rosewater filled his nose, replacing the damp earth of the cemetery. He opened his eyes, expecting to see the stars above Basra. Instead, he saw a ceiling of painted silk, lit by 100 lamps. He sat up, bewildered, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword, but finding only velvet cushions. And then he turned his head. He saw her. Sit al-Husn, who had stopped weeping and was now staring at him with wide, incredulous eyes. She saw not the monster she had been promised, but a youth who looked like a prince from a legend. For a long moment, neither spoke. The air in the pavilion crackled with a sudden, intense energy, the same energy that had bloomed in the apple tree back in Basra. Fate had locked its gaze upon them. "Who are you?" Sit al-Husn whispered, her voice trembling with hope. Badr al-Din blinked, dazzled by her beauty. I am Badr al-Din, son of the Vizier of Basra. But where am I? And who, by the grace of Allah, are you?" Before she could answer, the magic of the night took hold. The attraction was instant, powerful, and undeniable. It was as if the universe had conspired to bring them to this exact moment. And in the shadows above, the Ifrit and the Jinniya watched with satisfied smiles, knowing that the seed of the crimson apple, and the tragedy that would follow generations later, was being planted in this very room, amidst the confusion of a stolen wedding. Chapter 21. To understand the mercy of the spirits, O King of the Age, Rayhan continued, his voice dropping to a somber octave that seemed to dim the very torches in the hall of audience. One must first understand the depth of the cruelty of men. While the Jinn were plotting their game of beauty in the skies, the ground in Cairo was soaked with the tears of a father who had realized too late that pride is a sword that cuts the hand which wields it. The palace of the Grand Vizier Shams al-Din, usually a sanctuary of quiet power and refined grace, had been transformed into a theater of humiliation. Great King Vendon, the Sultan of Egypt, had arrived not to celebrate a union, but to oversee an execution of dignity. He sat upon a temporary throne erected in the main courtyard, holding a goblet of wine, his eyes gleaming with a malicious satisfaction as he watched his orders being carried out. The decree had been absolute. Sit al-Husn, the Lady of Beauty, was to be wed that very night. But there were no princes in attendance, no foreign dignitaries bearing gifts of frankincense and myrrh. There was only the groom chosen by the Sultan's spite. The gates of the stables were thrown open, and out shambled the instrument of the king's revenge, the hunchback of Caparaso. Rayhan shuddered, a theatrical gesture that nonetheless conveyed genuine revulsion. O King Rashid, to look upon the hunchback of Caparaso was to see a jest of nature. He was a creature who looked as though he had been crumpled by a giant's hand before the clay of his making was dry. His back bore a mountain of flesh that forced his gaze permanently toward the earth, as if searching for the hell from which he had crawled. His neck was sunken into his shoulders, his nose was a bulbous ruin, and one eye wandered aimlessly while the other stared with a piercing, rat-like intelligence. He smelled of manure and sour straw, a stench that the perfumes of the court could not mask. Yet, for all his hideousness, his arrogance was even more grotesque. Dressed in robes of scarlet silk that hung absurdly on his twisted frame, and wearing a turban that sat askew on his massive head, the hunchback strutted through the courtyard. He clapped his hands and clicked his tongue, ordering the vizier's servants about as if he were born to the purple. He believed, in his small and twisted mind, that his sudden elevation was due to his own hidden charms, rather than the Sultan's cruelty. Look at me, the hunchback gloated, spinning clumsily so that his bells jingled. Am I not a vision? The Sultan knows true quality when he sees it. Tonight, the daughter of the high-end mighty Shams al-Din shall wash my feet and call me master. Prepare the feast, bring the dancers, for the moon has descended to wed the earth. The courtiers stood in silence, their heads bowed. They dared not speak against the Sultan, but their hearts broke for the bride. The musicians played, but the melodies were slow and mournful, sounding more like a dirge for the dead than a zephyr for the living. The women of the household, the tiring women and the nurses who had raised Sit al-Husn, wept openly into their veils, their wails rising above the music like the keening of gulls before a storm. And what of Shams al-Din? Rayhan asked, looking at Jafaar and the Caliph, the father who had once sworn he would never marry his daughter to his brother's son. He stood by the Sultan's chair, forced to witness the destruction of his house. His face was gray, the color of old ash. Every jeer from the hunchback was a dagger in his heart. Every laugh from great King Vendon was a lash upon his soul. He remembered the garden in Cairo years ago. He remembered Nur al-Din's plea for brotherhood. He remembered his own oath. I would rather marry her to the lowest creature in the kingdom. And now, the heavens had answered his oath with a terrifying literalism. The procession began. Sit al-Husn was led out, supported on either side by weeping attendants. She was adorned in the 7 robes of the bridal ceremony, heavy with gold and diamonds, but she walked as one marching to the gallows. She did not look up. She could not bear to see the monster who awaited her. The hunchback of Caparaso, seeing his bride, let out a whoop of delight and scrambled onto the dais, slobbering on his hand before reaching out to touch her veil. "Gently, my pretty," the hunchback cackled, his breath smelling of onions and rot. "Do not be shy. The Sultan has given you to me, and I shall be a demanding lord." Great King Vendan laughed until he spilled his wine. "See how well they match, Vizier." The Sultan taunted Shams al-Din. "Is this not better than your brother's son? Is this not the son-in-law your pride demanded?" Shams al-Din closed his eyes, a single tear escaping to trace a path through the lines of his aged face. "It is the will of Allah," he whispered, though his spirit was crushed. "I have dug this pit with my own tongue, and now I must lie in it." The ceremony was rushed, a mockery of the sacred rites. When it was done, the hunchback, emboldened by wine and power, demanded to be taken to the bridal chamber. He waddled ahead, the bells on his hat jingling a discordant tune, while the sobbing bride followed behind. The door to the inner sanctum, the very room where the Ifrit and the Jinniya were waiting in the shadows, was thrown open. The hunchback stepped across the threshold, believing he was entering paradise, unaware that he was walking straight into the domain of magic, and that his night of triumph was about to become a nightmare of confusion. Chapter 22. The heavy oak door of the bridal chamber swung open with a groan, admitting the hunchback of Caparaso. He strutted in, his bells jingling, carrying the stench of the stable into the perfumed sanctuary. He paused, squinting in the dim light, expecting to find his terrified bride awaiting his command. Instead, the room was empty, save for the dancing shadows cast by a single, guttering candle. "Wife," the hunchback called out, his voice a rasping croak. "Where are you, my little gazelle? Come out, for your master is here." Suddenly, the candle flame flared violently, turning from warm yellow to a cold, ghostly blue. The temperature in the room plummeted, causing the hunchback's breath to mist in the air. From the darkest corner of the ceiling, a voice boomed, a sound like rocks grinding together deep within the earth. "Silence, you bag of vermin." The hunchback shrieked and fell to his knees, covering his head with his spindly arms. "Who is there? Is it a thief? I have guards. I am the Sultan's favorite." The Ifrit materialized from the shadows, a towering colossus of smoke and fire. His eyes burned like coals, and his mouth was a cavern of jagged teeth. He loomed over the hunchback, filling the room with the smell of sulfur and ozone. "I am no thief," the Ifrit roared. "I am the guardian of beauty, and you are a stain upon this night. Did you think to touch the moon with hands covered in filth?" The hunchback whimpered, his bladder failing him. "Mercy, mercy, O great spirit. It was the Sultan. He made me do it. The Sultan commands the day," the Ifrit growled, seizing the hunchback by the ankle and lifting him effortlessly into the air. "But the night belongs to us. You shall spend your wedding night not in a bed of silk, but in a place befitting your nature." With a flick of his wrist, the Ifrit dragged the hunchback through the air, carrying him out of the chamber and down the corridor to the privy. There, with a cruel laugh, he upended the groom, forcing him to stand on his head with his face mere inches from the foul opening. "Stay here," the Ifrit commanded, binding him with invisible chains. "If you move, if you speak, if you so much as breathe too loudly, I will turn you into a stone jug and shatter you against the wall." Leaving the hunchback frozen in terror and indignity, The Ifrit returned to the bridal chamber, where the Jinniya was waiting. She stood over Badr al-Din, who was just beginning to stir from the enchantment she had placed upon him earlier. The beautiful youth blinked, his mind foggy, the memories of Basra and the graveyard feeling like distant dreams. The Jinniya leaned close, her voice a soft melody in his ear. "Wake, my love. The night is short, and your bride awaits." Badr al-Din sat up, shaking his head to clear the cobwebs. He looked around the opulent room, bewildered. "Where am I? This is not my home. Who are you?" "You are in Cairo," the Ifrit said, shrinking his form to that of a human servant to avoid frightening the boy further. "You arrived this evening. Do you not remember? You are the groom, the true groom, the groom?" Badr al-Din repeated, confused. He looked down at his clothes, the fine robes he had worn to mourn his father, and found they had been magically altered to the festive attire of a wedding prince. "But I was in Basra, my father." "Hush," the Jinniya soothed, placing a hand on his forehead. "The grief has clouded your mind. You are Badr al-Din, son of the vizier, and tonight you wed the daughter of the vizier of Cairo. It is written." Just then, the inner door opened, and the tiring woman led Sit al-Husn back into the room. She entered with her head bowed, expecting the monster. But when she lifted her eyes, she saw Badr al-Din standing by the bed, tall and radiant, the candlelight playing upon his noble features. The breath caught in her throat. "You," she whispered, disbelief warring with hope. "You are not him. You are not the hunchback." Badr al-Din looked at her, and the confusion in his mind evaporated, replaced by a fierce, instinctive certainty. This was the woman from his dreams. This was the face he had been searching for without knowing it. "No," he said softly, stepping toward her. "I am Badr al-Din, and if I am dreaming, let me never wake." Sit al-Husn smiled, a radiant dawn breaking over her sorrowful face. "Then you are the one I have prayed for," she said. The Ifrit and the Jinniya watched from the shadows as the two cousins, unaware of their shared blood, but bound by the undeniable pull of destiny, reached for one another. The swap was complete. The monster was in the privy, and the prince was in the palace. And in the corner of the room, unnoticed by the lovers, a small pouch fell from Badr al-Din's robe, a pouch containing the seeds of the iron-barked apple tree, brought all the way from Basra to take root in the soil of Cairo. Chapter 23. "And thus, O King of the Age," Rayhan continued, his voice softening to match the intimacy of the tale he wove. The stage was set not for a tragedy, but for a reunion written in the stars long before either soul had drawn breath. In the bridal chamber of the palace in Cairo, the air was thick with the scent of musk and ambergris, but it was the electricity of destiny that truly filled the room. Sit al-Husn, the lady of beauty, gazed upon the stranger standing before her. She had expected a monster, a creature of nightmares with a twisted spine and a soul to match. Instead, she beheld Badr al-Din, a youth whose countenance was like the rising sun, radiant and noble. The terror that had gripped her heart melted away like frost under the morning light, replaced by a wonder so profound it robbed her of speech. Badr al-Din, for his part, was equally ensnared, though his mind was still fogged by the magic of the Jinniya. The sight of Sit al-Husn pierced through the enchantment. He saw in her not just a bride, but a mirror of his own spirit. He stepped forward, his movements graceful and assured, the instincts of his lineage guiding him where memory failed. "O my lady," Badr al-Din said, his voice gentle and melodious, "why do you look upon me with such astonishment? Am I not he whom you awaited?" Sit al-Husn found her voice, though it trembled like a leaf in the wind. "My lord," she whispered, I awaited my doom, for my father and the Sultan had promised me to the hunchback of Caparaso, a groom of horror. Yet here you stand, a prince among men. Was the hunchback but a cruel jest, a test of my obedience? Badr al-Din, influenced by the whispers of the invisible Ifrit, smiled and took her hand. A jest indeed, he lied, believing the words to be true. That creature was but a servant, hired to ward off the evil eye with his ugliness. For beauty such as yours, my lady, attracts the jealousy of the world. We allowed him to play the groom in the procession, so that the envious spirits would strike him and leave us in peace. But now the night has come, and the pretender has been cast into the shadows where he belongs. Sit, Al-Hassan laughed, a sound of pure relief that rang like silver bells. Praise be to Allah, who has turned my nightmare into a dream, she cried. She led him to the divan, and they sat together, two halves of a whole finally rejoined. They spoke through the night, not as strangers, but as souls recognizing an ancient kinship. They did not know they were cousins, children of the separated brothers Nur al-Din and Shams al-Din, yet the blood in their veins sang the same song. As the night deepened, Badr al-Din removed his outer robe, heavy with the gold embroidery of the wedding feast. He placed it upon a chair by the bedside. In the pocket of that robe, O king, lay the leather-bound notebook his father had given him, and beside it, a small pouch of silk. Inside that pouch were the seeds of the iron-barked apple tree from his garden in Basra, seeds he had carried as a talisman of home. It was in this hour, under the watchful and amused eyes of the Jinn hiding in the rafters, that the union was consummated. It was a union of magic and blood, of Basra and Cairo reunited. And from this night of destiny, a child was conceived, a boy who would be named Ajib. But more than a child was planted that night, for when Badr al-Din placed his robe upon the chair, he unknowingly planted the legacy of the apple in the soil of Egypt. The pouch of seeds, forgotten in the bliss of the moment, would remain in Cairo. Those seeds, carried from the garden of the exiled brother, would eventually find their way into the earth of the vizier's palace. They would grow into a tree that bore fruit of unnatural beauty and dangerous power. The very apples that would one day travel back to Baghdad to destroy the life of the Lady Shivi and nearly claim the head of your faithful servant, Jafaar. But for now, Rayhan said, pausing to let the weight of the irony settle upon the court, there was only joy. The lovers slept in each other's arms, blissfully unaware that the dawn brings not only the sun, but the separation. For the Jinn are fickle creatures, and the wager was not yet fully settled. The Ifrit and the Jinniya watched the sleeping pair, their game concluded, ready to tear the groom away before the first light of morning could reveal the truth to the waking world. Chapter 24. As the first thread of gray light appeared on the eastern horizon, threatening to unravel the tapestry of the night, the Ifrit and the Jinniya concluded their game. The wager had been a draw. Both Badr al-Din and Sit al-Hassan were deemed equal in their splendor, and so neither spirit could claim victory. But the Jinn are creatures of chaos, and they could not simply return the pieces to the board as they found them. The Jinniya leaned down and plucked Badr al-Din from the embrace of his slumbering bride. She was careful not to wake him, weaving a spell of deep sleep once more around his mind. He floated into the air, leaving behind the warmth of the bed, the scent of jasmine, and the future he had unknowingly secured. But in the haste of the departure, O king, a crucial detail was overlooked. Badr al-Din was lifted in only his night clothes, a thin linen shirt and trousers. His magnificent turban, adorned with the jewels of his rank, remained on the chair beside the bed, and tucked within the folds of his discarded outer robe, forgotten in the rapture of the night, was the leather-bound notebook his father had given him. The history of his lineage, the proof of his identity, and the seeds of the cursed apple were all left behind in Cairo, silent witnesses to a groom who would vanish like smoke. The Ifrit seized Badr al-Din, his massive hand encompassing the youth, and launched himself into the sky. They flew north this time, away from the Nile, away from the Tigris, crossing the vast expanse of the desert toward the ancient city of Damascus. The journey that would take a caravan months was completed in the beat of a wing. Just as the sun began to crown the distant mountains with fire, the Ifrit descended. He dropped Badr al-Din at the city gates of Damascus, laying him on the cold cobblestones near the massive wooden doors. Then, with a cackle that sounded like the cracking of dry bones, the spirits vanished into the ether, their amusement satisfied, leaving a mortal to wake into a nightmare. When Badr al-Din opened his eyes, the confusion was absolute. One moment he had been in a palace of gold and silk, holding the most beautiful woman in the world. The next, he was lying in the dirt, shivering in the morning chill, surrounded by the braying of donkeys and the shouts of farmers bringing their goods to market. He sat up, his head spinning. The familiar skyline of Basra was gone. The minarets of Cairo were a fading dream. Before him stood the imposing walls of a city he did not know. Passers-by stared at him, a handsome youth in nothing but his underclothes, looking like a prince who had lost his kingdom in a game of dice. "Look at the madman," they whispered. "Is he drunk, or has he been touched by the Jinn?" Badr al-Din scrambled to his feet, panic rising in his chest like bile. "Where am I?" he shouted to a passing merchant. "Is this Cairo? Where is my wife? Where is the palace of the vizier?" The merchant laughed, shaking his head. "Cairo, you are far from the Nile, boy. This is Damascus, the pearl of the East. You must have slept walking for 1,000 miles. Damascus. The word hit Badr al-Din like a physical blow. He was alone, half-naked, and penniless in a strange land. He checked his pockets for his father's notebook, for the proof of who he was, but found nothing. It was gone. His history, his identity, his very name seemed to have been stripped away by the night. He was no longer the vizier's son. He was a nobody. Despair threatened to crush him, but hunger is a cruel master that demands attention. Badr al-Din wandered the streets, his stomach gnawing at his ribs. He passed bakeries and kitchens, the sense of roasting meat and fresh bread taunting him. Finally, he stopped before a cookshop where the smells were particularly divine. Inside, a jovial man named Chef Himaj was pulling trays of golden tarts from a clay oven. Badr al-Din stood in the doorway, watching the chef work. A memory stirred within him, not of his father's court, but of the kitchens where he had often snuck in as a child to watch the cooks prepare sweetmeats. He knew the art of pastry. It was a skill he had learned for pleasure, never thinking it would be his salvation. Chef Himaj saw the youth and took pity on his wretched state. "You look like you have lost a war with the world, son," the chef said, handing him a warm bun. "Can you work? I need hands to knead the dough." Badr al-Din took the bread, tears stinging his eyes. "I can cook," he whispered. "I can make pomegranate tarts such as you have never tasted." And so, the son of a vizier became a cook's apprentice. He tied an apron over his nightshirt and buried his hands in flour, hiding his noble birth under the dust of the kitchen. But he poured his soul into his work, crafting pastries of such delicate perfection that they became famous throughout Damascus. Yet, every tart he baked was seasoned with the bitterness of his loss. a silent message sent out into the world, hoping that one day the taste would reach the lips of the one he had left behind. Chapter 25. While Badr al-Din stood bewildered in the dusty streets of Damascus, the sun rose over Cairo, casting its golden light upon a scene of utter confusion. The palace of Shams al-Din stirred to life, the servants whispering and casting anxious glances toward the bridal chamber. They expected to hear the weeping of their mistress or the triumphant crowing of the hunchback. Instead, there was only silence. Shams al-Din, his face etched with the sorrow of a father who has failed his child, walked heavily down the corridor. He dreaded what he would find, but duty compelled him to witness the aftermath of the Sultan's cruelty. He reached the door of the bridal suite and knocked softly. There was no answer. With a trembling hand, he pushed the door open. Inside, he found his daughter, Sit al-Husn, sitting upon the bed. But she was not weeping. She was not torn by grief. She was radiant, her face glowing with a secret joy that defied the horrors of the previous evening. She looked up as her father entered, a smile touching her lips. "Good morning, father," she said, her voice clear and bright. "Why do you look so grave on the morning after my wedding?" Shams al-Din stared at her, fearing that the shock had broken her mind. "My daughter," he whispered. Where is your husband?" "My husband?" Sit al-Husn laughed. "My beautiful, noble husband has just stepped out. Perhaps he went to the bathhouse." "Oh, father, you were right to hide him." The hunchback was a brilliant jest, a clever ruse to ward off the evil eye. "But my true groom, he is perfection itself." Shams al-Din's heart sank. Madness, he thought. The hunchback's cruelty has driven her mad. "Daughter," he said gently. There was no ruse. The hunchback was the groom. "Where is he?" Sit al-Husn frowned, confusion clouding her joy. "The hunchback, that foul creature. My husband cast him out hours ago. He is a prince, father. Look." She pointed to the chair beside the bed. There, resting on the velvet cushion, was a turban of exquisite craftsmanship. It was wound from the finest silk of Basra and stitched with threads of pure gold. Shams al-Din approached it slowly. He picked it up, his fingers tracing the embroidery. It was the turban of a high-ranking vizier, far too noble for a stable groom, and certainly not of Egyptian make. Before he could speak, a commotion erupted in the hallway. Servants were running, shouting, pointing toward the end of the corridor. Shams al-Din rushed out, followed by his daughter. They found a crowd gathering around the door to the privy. The vizier pushed his way through, and there, stuck upside down with his head in the latrine hole, was the hunchback of Caparaso. The hunchback was blue in the face, his eyes bulging with terror. He was babbling incoherently about demons and fire. "Don't let him turn me into a jug," he shrieked as the guards pulled him free. "The giant, the teeth, he put me here. He said I was a stain on the night." The court erupted in gasps and whispers. Shams al-Din looked from the terrified hunchback to the serene face of his daughter, and then back to the golden turban in his hands. He unraveled the silk slightly, and a piece of paper fluttered to the floor. He picked it up. It was a small scroll, hidden in the folds of the cloth. He read it, and his knees nearly gave way. "This turban," Shams al-Din whispered, his voice trembling, "belongs to the vizier of Basra. It bears the seal of Nur al-Din." The name hung in the air like a ghost. Shams al-Din looked at his daughter with wide eyes. "Nur al-Din, my brother, this is his turban. But how could his son be here?" He rushed back into the bridal chamber and began to search frantically. He lifted the heavy robe that had been left on the chair. From its pocket fell a leather-bound notebook. Shams al-Din opened it, and there, In the familiar handwriting of the brother he had driven away so many years ago was the history of their family. He read of Nur al-Din's journey, his marriage, and the birth of a son named Badr al-Din. Tears streamed down the old vizier's face. He fell to his knees, clutching the book to his chest. "Allah is great," he cried. "The circle is closed. My brother's son, my own nephew. He was here. He was the true groom. The hunchback was but a pawn in a game played by angels." Sit al-Hussein knelt beside him, reading the book over his shoulder. "Badr al-Din," she whispered, testing the name on her tongue. "So that is his name, my cousin, my husband." But joy was quickly tempered by mystery. "Where is he?" Shams al-Din asked, looking around the room. "If he was here, where has he gone? Why leave his turban, his history, his very identity behind?" They searched the palace. They searched the city. But Badr al-Din had vanished as completely as if he had been a dream. Sit al-Hussein was left with a child in her womb, a book of history, and a memory of a single night of perfection. But unbeknownst to them, hidden in the folds of the discarded robe, nestled deep in a pocket Shams al-Din had missed, lay a small pouch of seeds. The seeds of the iron-barked apple tree were now in Cairo, waiting for the tears of a lonely wife to water them into life. Chapter 26. Time, O Prince of the Faithful, is a river that flows differently for those who mourn. For Shams al-Din and Sit al-Hussein in Cairo, the years were marked by the growing of a child, a son named Ajib, who was the very image of his vanished father. But for Badr al-Din, stranded in the bustling markets of Damascus, time was a slow, grinding millstone. Stripped of his silk and his station, the vizier's son had become a ghost in a foreign land, hidden beneath a veneer of flour and sugar. Chef Himaj, the jovial master of the cookshop, had taken Badr al-Din in not out of charity alone, but because he saw a flicker of genius in the boy's desperate eyes. "The kitchen is a battlefield," Himaj would say, wiping his brow with a greasy apron, "and a pastry is a weapon of peace. If you can conquer a man's stomach, you can conquer his heart." Badr al-Din learned quickly. His hands, once trained to hold a pen and a sword, adapted to the rolling pin and the whisk. He discovered a solace in the precision of the recipe, a comfort in the alchemy of baking. While he could not control the chaotic winds of fate that had blown him across the world, he could control the rise of dough and the set of custard. He poured his longing, his confusion, and his love into his creations. His masterpiece was the pomegranate tart. It was a recipe born from a memory of his father's garden in Basra, tweaked with the spices of Damascus. The crust was flaky as a moth's wing, melting upon the tongue. The filling was a ruby-red reduction of pomegranate juice, sweet yet tart, like the sting of a lover's farewell. He spiced it with a hint of cardamom and rosewater, the scent of the bride he had held for only one night. Word of these tarts spread through Damascus like wildfire. Merchants delayed their caravans to taste them. Poets composed verses extolling their flavor. Badr al-Din became known simply as the Prince of Pastry, a title spoken with a reverence usually reserved for royalty. Yet, despite his fame, he remained a figure of melancholy. He would stand by the ovens, his face streaked with soot, watching the crowds with distant eyes, searching every face for a sign of Cairo, for a glimpse of the life that had been stolen from him. 7 years passed in this manner. 7 long years of kneading and baking, of waking before dawn and sleeping, exhausted after dusk. Badr al-Din grew from a youth into a man, his shoulders broadening from the labor, his face hardening with the resilience of the working class. but he never removed the simple silver ring he had worn on his wedding night, the only token he had left of his identity. One day, a great caravan arrived from the south. It was not a trade mission, but a royal procession, flying the banners of the Sultan of Egypt. Rumors flew through the souk that the Grand Vizier of Cairo himself was traveling with the caravan, searching for something or someone lost long ago. Badr al-Din heard the gossip as he pulled a tray of tarts from the fire, but he paid it no mind. Why would a vizier come for a cook? He did not know that destiny was once again knocking at his door. He did not know that the son he had never met, Ajib, was now a boy of 7 years, traveling with his grandfather Shams al-Din. And he certainly did not know that the taste of a pomegranate tart, a flavor woven from the threads of his own memory, was about to become the key that would unlock the prison of his exile. The Jinn had played their game, but now it was the turn of the human heart to make its move. Chapter 27. While Badr al-Din labored in the kitchens of Damascus, the sun rose and set thousands of times over the minarets of Cairo. In the palace of Shams al-Din, the memory of that strange wedding night had not faded, but rather had taken living form. Sit al-Husn, the Lady of Beauty, had given birth to a son, a boy she named Ajib. And truly, he was a wonder to behold. He possessed the striking features of his vanished father, the same dark, intelligent eyes, the same noble brow, and the fierce pride of his grandfather. Ajib grew up in the lap of luxury, surrounded by servants who catered to his every whim. He was told that he was the son of the Grand Vizier's daughter, a prince in all but title. But secrets, O king, are like seeds planted in shallow soil. Eventually, they break the surface. Ajib, strong of arm and sharp of tongue, walked the streets of Cairo with an arrogance that chafed his peers. He would strike the children of the merchants with his silver-tipped cane and boast of his high station. One afternoon, during a game of ball in the dusty square, Ajib struck a boy too hard. The boy, nursing a bruised cheek and a bruised ego, glared at the young tyrant. "You strut like a peacock, Ajib," the boy shouted, his voice ringing clear in the sudden silence. "But who are you, really? You call yourself noble, but you do not even know your father's name. We all have fathers we can point to, but you are a son of mystery, a child of the wind." The laughter of the other children was a lash to Ajib's pride. He froze, the silver cane trembling in his hand. The insult struck deep, piercing the armor of his arrogance, and touching the hidden insecurity that had always plagued him. He dropped the ball and ran, fleeing the square with tears of rage burning his eyes. He ran straight to the palace, bursting into his mother's chambers, where Sit al-Husn sat embroidering by the window. "Mother," Ajib cried, throwing himself at her feet. "Tell me the truth. The children in the street mock me. They say I have no father. They call me a child of the wind. Who is he? Where is he? If he is dead, take me to his tomb so I may pray. If he is alive, take me to him so I may stand by his side." Sit al-Husn dropped her needle, her face paling. She looked at her son, seeing the pain and confusion etched into his youthful features. She knew the time for silence had ended. She took Ajib's face in her hands, looking deep into eyes that were a mirror of the man she had loved for a single night. "My son," she whispered, "do not listen to the tongues of fools. Your father is not dead, nor is he a phantom. He is a prince of Basra, a man of noble blood named Badr al-Din. He was taken from us by the whims of fate on the very night you were conceived." Ajib stood up, his small chest heaving. "Then we must find him. If he is a prince, why do we sit here while he is lost? Grandfather is powerful. You are the daughter of the vizier. Why have we not searched the world for him? The boy's passion ignited a fire that had long smoldered in the heart of Shams al-Din. The Grand Vizier, hearing the commotion, entered the room. He saw his grandson's distress and felt the weight of his own guilt, the guilt of a brother who had driven his kin away, and a father who had failed to protect his daughter's happiness. He looked at the determined face of Ajib and saw a chance for redemption. "You are right, my boy," Shams al-Din declared, his voice firm with a renewed purpose. "We have waited long enough for destiny to bring him back. It is time we went to meet it. Prepare the caravans. Gather the guards. We shall travel to Basra, to Damascus, to the ends of the earth if we must. We will find your father, Badr al-Din, and we will make our family whole again." And so, a great expedition was launched. It was a search fueled by love, by regret, and by the fierce demand of a boy who refused to be a mystery any longer. They set out from Cairo, a ribbon of camels and horses winding across the desert, carrying with them the hope of a reunion and the lingering magic of a story that was far from over. Chapter 28. The caravan that departed from the gates of Cairo was a spectacle fit for a sultan. It was not a train of merchants seeking profit, but a pilgrimage of the heart seeking a lost soul. At its head rode Shams al-Din, his back straight despite the burden of his years, his eyes scanning the horizon with the desperate hope of a man seeking redemption. Beside him, in a litter draped with silk and gold, rode Sit al-Husn, clutching the leather-bound notebook that was the only map to her husband's past, and riding a spirited pony, his face alight with the thrill of adventure, was young Ajib, the son of mystery who was determined to claim his name. They traveled east, crossing the shifting sands of the Sinai, retracing in reverse the journey Nur al-Din had made so many years before. The wind whispered tales of the brothers' separation, and the stars seemed to guide them toward the truth. Shams al-Din read from the notebook by the light of the campfire, his voice breaking as he recounted the words of his estranged brother. He realized with a growing, aching certainty that the groom who had vanished from the bridal chamber was no stranger, but his own flesh and blood, the nephew he had sworn never to embrace. "Allah is the best of planners," Shams al-Din murmured to the night sky. "I drove my brother away with pride, and yet fate brought his son back to my daughter's bed. The circle is drawn by a hand far greater than mine." Their journey took them first to Basra, the city of canals and dates. They arrived with fanfare, the Grand Vizier of Egypt seeking audience with the Sultan of Basra. When Shams al-Din presented the turban, the golden-stitched crown, left behind by the fleeing groom, the court of Basra gasped in recognition. "This belongs to Badr al-Din," the elders cried, "the son of our beloved Nur al-Din. He vanished 7 years ago, taken by the night, leaving only grief behind." The revelation struck Shams al-Din like a physical blow. He visited the tomb of his brother Nur al-Din, weeping tears of bitter regret upon the cold marble. "Forgive me, brother," he sobbed. "I let a foolish argument steal our years. But I swear by the Kaaba, I will find your son. I will bring him home, and our bloodlines shall be united in joy as they were once united in sorrow." But Badr al-Din was not in Basra. The trail was cold, save for the whispers of travelers who spoke of a youth seen wandering the roads north. So the caravan turned its face toward Damascus, the ancient city of jasmine and steel. They traveled slowly, stopping in every town and village, asking after a man of noble bearing lost to the world. It was a needle in a haystack of empires, yet Ajib's determination never wavered. "He is out there," the boy would say, staring at the distant mountains. I can feel him. Finally, after months of travel, the minarets of Damascus rose from the dusty plains like fingers pointing to heaven. The caravan set up a sprawling camp outside the city gates, a city of tents that rivaled the markets of Damascus itself. The servants of Shams al-Din were sent into the city to buy provisions, and among them walked Ajib, accompanied by his faithful eunuch guardian. The boy, eager to see the world, wandered through the bustling souks, his senses overwhelmed by the sights and smells of the great market. And it was there, amidst the chaos of commerce, that the scent of destiny drifted on the breeze. It was not the smell of gold or spices, but the warm, sweet aroma of baking pastry. It was the scent of pomegranates and rosewater, a smell that stirred a memory in Ajib's blood, a memory he could not possibly have, yet one that pulled him with the irresistible force of a magnet toward a humble cookshop nestled in the heart of the bazaar. Chapter 29. The ancient city of Damascus lay under the noon sun like a lion basking in the heat, its golden domes shimmering through the haze of dust and spices. The streets were a river of humanity, flowing with merchants, beggars, soldiers, and thieves, all shouting, bartering, and living their tumultuous lives. Into this chaotic stream stepped Ajib, the son of Badr al-Din, a boy of 7 summers whose arrogance was matched only by his beauty. He walked with the strut of a prince, his eunuch guardian trailing behind, fanning the boy with a palm leaf and muttering prayers for patience. Ajib's nose, usually turned up in disdain at the common smells of the street, suddenly twitched. Cutting through the stench of donkeys and unwashed bodies came a scent, so divine, it seemed to have drifted down from the gardens of paradise itself. It was the smell of warm pastry, of melting sugar and tart pomegranates, spiced with cardamom and memories. It was a scent that pulled at the boy's soul with an invisible thread. "Stop," Ajib commanded, halting in the middle of the crowded thoroughfare. "Do you smell that, eunuch? It is the food of angels. Find the source at once." The eunuch sighed, wiping sweat from his brow. "Master Ajib, the camp is full of delicacies prepared by your grandfather's own chefs. Why must we chase after street food? Because I command it." Ajib snapped, his eyes flashing. "And because it smells like something I have known forever, though I have never tasted it." They followed the scent through the winding alleyways, past the coppersmiths and the carpet weavers, until they stood before a modest shop. The sign above the door was weathered, but the crowd gathered outside spoke of the treasures within. Inside, moving with the grace of a dancer amidst clouds of flour, was a man. His face was smudged with soot, and his clothes were simple linen, but there was a nobility in his bearing that the grime could not hide. It was Badr al-Din, the prince of pastry, the lost vizier of Basra. Ajib stepped into the shop, wrinkling his nose at the heat, but unable to tear his eyes away from the man behind the counter. Badr al-Din looked up, wiping his hands on his apron. When his gaze landed on the boy, time seemed to stop. A jolt of electricity ran through the cook's body, a resonance of blood calling to blood. He stared at Ajib, seeing the echo of his own face in the child's features, the same dark eyes, the same stubborn chin. His heart began to hammer against his ribs with a rhythm of frantic hope. "Welcome, young master," Badr al-Din said, his voice trembling slightly. "You honor my humble shop. What can I serve you?" Ajib looked the cook up and down with a critical eye. "Your shop is small and hot," the boy declared haughtily, "but your wares smell fit for a sultan. I will have a pomegranate tart, and be quick about it, for I am not accustomed to waiting." Badr al-Din smiled, a sad, wistful expression that softened the harsh lines of his face. He saw the arrogance in the boy, the same pride that had once driven his own father and uncle apart. Yet, he felt an overwhelming urge to embrace the child, to weep tears of inexplicable joy. "For you, little prince," Badr al-Din whispered, "I would bake the moon itself." He selected the finest tart from the tray, glistening with ruby-red syrup, and placed it on a silver platter he kept for special guests. He sprinkled it with crushed pistachios and rose petals, presenting it to Ajib with a bow that was far too graceful for a simple cook. Ajib took a bite. His eyes went wide. The flavor exploded in his mouth, a symphony of sweet and sour that resonated deep within his being. It tasted of comfort, of longing, of a home he had never known. He ate ravenously, the crumbs falling onto his silk tunic. Badr al-Din watched him, tears filling his eyes, though he could not say why. He did not know this was his son, and Ajib did not know this was his father. They were two ships passing in the fog of destiny, linked only by the taste of a pomegranate tart. "It is acceptable," Ajib mumbled, wiping his mouth, trying to maintain his composure. "You have some skill, cook. What is your name?" "I am called Badr," the man replied softly. "Just Badr, will you eat another?" "On the house?" Ajib hesitated. The eunuch was tugging at his sleeve, urging him to leave. "We must go, master. The vizier will be worried." But the boy felt a strange reluctance to depart. He looked at the cook one last time, feeling a pull in his chest he could not explain. "Perhaps tomorrow," Ajib said, tossing a gold dinar onto the counter. "If I am in the mood for sweets." He turned and marched out, leaving Badr al-Din standing alone in the cloud of flour, clutching the coin as if it were a talisman, his heart aching with a profound and mysterious loss. The connection had been made, the circuit closed. The tart had been eaten, and the magic of the reunion had begun its slow, inevitable work. Chapter 30. The scent of rosewater and baked pomegranate lingered in the air long after the boy had vanished into the throng of the market. A ghostly reminder of a connection that Badr al-Din could feel, but not name. He stood by the counter of his shop, his hands covered in flour, staring at the empty doorway. His heart beat a strange rhythm, an ache of familiarity that defied logic. Why did the sight of an arrogant child stir such profound tenderness in his soul? Meanwhile, Ajib returned to the sprawling encampment outside the city walls. The taste of the tart still danced upon his tongue, a flavor so specific and evocative that it unsettled him. He marched into the main tent where his mother, Sit al-Husn, and his grandfather, Shams al-Din, were dining. The tent was a palace of canvas, hung with silks and lit by silver lamps. "Where have you been, my son?" Sit al-Husn asked, noting the dusting of sugar on the boy's tunic. "You smell of the bakery." "I was in the souk," Ajib replied, trying to sound indifferent. "I found a cookshop. The man there, he was strange. He stared at me as if I were a ghost. But his tarts, mother, they were extraordinary. They tasted exactly like the ones you make for me on feast days. The same spice, the same sweetness. It was as if your own hand had shaped them." Sit al-Husn froze, her spoon hovering halfway to her mouth. She exchanged a sharp glance with her father. The recipe for pomegranate tarts was a secret of their house, a specific blend of ingredients passed down from Shams al-Din's own mother in Cairo. It was not a common dish in Damascus. "Did you say exactly?" Shams al-Din asked, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing. "Exactly," Ajib confirmed, "but surely it is a coincidence." The man was a commoner, covered in soot. He called himself Badr. Sit al-Hassan whispered, the blood draining from her face. Badr al-Din. Shams al-Din stood up, his face flushed with sudden hope. It cannot be a coincidence. A recipe is a signature, written in flavor. If this cook knows the secret of our house, he must be connected to us. Perhaps he learned it from the man we seek. Or perhaps he let the thought hang in the air, too fragile to voice. Go back, Ajib, the vizier commanded. Take the eunuch. Bring this cook to us. Do not tell him who we are. Say only that you wish to buy more of his wares, but bring him here. We must see his face. We must taste his work for ourselves. Ajib scowled. Must I? He is dirty, and he looks at me with such pitiful eyes. It is tiresome. Go, Shams al-Din roared, his patience snapping. This may be the end of our journey. Do as you are told. Reluctantly, Ajib returned to the city, the eunuch trailing behind him. They found the shop just as Badr al-Din was closing the shutters. The cook saw the boy return, and his face lit up with a joy so pure it was heartbreaking. You returned, Badr al-Din exclaimed, wiping his hands on his apron. Did the tart please you? Shall I bake another? My master commands your presence, the eunuch said, stepping forward before Ajib could speak. He wishes to taste your tarts. Bring a tray and follow us to the camp. Badr al-Din hesitated. He was weary, and the thought of serving a haughty lord in a camp was unappealing. But then he looked at Ajib. The boy was looking away, feigning disinterest. But Badr al-Din saw the way his hand twitched, the way he shifted his weight. It was the stance of a lonely child pretending to be a man. I will come, Badr al-Din said softly. For the sake of the young master, I will come. He packed a tray of his finest pastries, locked his shop, and followed them through the twilight streets. They walked out of the city gates and into the vast field of tents. Badr al-Din marveled at the richness of the encampment, the banners fluttering in the wind. He felt a sense of dread and anticipation coiling in his stomach. They arrived at the main tent. The guards pulled back the flaps, revealing the opulent interior. Shams al-Din sat upon a raised cushion, looking like a king in exile. Al-Hassan sat beside him, her face veiled, her hands trembling in her lap. Badr al-Din entered and bowed low, keeping his eyes on the carpet. Peace be upon you, noble lords. I am but a humble cook summoned to serve. Rise, Shams al-Din commanded. His voice shook slightly. Bring the food forward. Badr al-Din stepped up and placed the tray on the low table. The scent of the tarts wafted up, filling the tent. Shams al-Din reached out and took one. He took a bite, chewing slowly. He closed his eyes. The taste was unmistakable. It was the taste of his mother's kitchen in Cairo. It was the taste of home. Who taught you this? Shams al-Din whispered, opening his eyes to stare piercingly at the cook. I taught myself, my lord, Badr al-Din stammered, confused by the intensity of the scrutiny. Though the memory of the flavor has been with me since childhood, it is the taste of a life I once had. Al-Hassan let out a soft cry. She stood up and approached him. Look at him, father, she said, her voice trembling. Look past the soot and the flour. Look at his eyes. Shams al-Din rose and grabbed a pitcher of water. He walked over to Badr al-Din and, ignoring the cook's protest, poured the water over his face, washing away the grime of the kitchen. Badr al-Din sputtered, wiping his eyes. When he looked up, wet and clean, the resemblance was undeniable. He was the image of the man who had vanished from the bridal chamber 7 years ago. He was the image of the brother Shams al-Din had lost. It is him, Shams al-Din breathed, tears spilling onto his beard. By Allah, it is him. Badr al-Din looked from the old man to the veiled woman, and finally to the boy, Ajib, who was watching with wide, stunned eyes. The fog of years began to lift. The face of the woman, though veiled, held a presence he knew in his soul. The boy was his own reflection. "Who are you?" Badr al-Din whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Why do you look at me as if I am a ghost?" "Because you are," Sit al-Husn said, throwing back her veil. "You are the ghost who left me in the night. You are Badr al-Din, my husband, and this," she pulled Ajib forward, "this is your son." The world spun. Badr al-Din fell to his knees, not in supplication, but in sheer, overwhelming relief. The exile was over. The circle was closed. The pomegranate tart, baked with the spices of sorrow, had led him home. Chapter 31. While the sun climbed high over the dusty plains of Damascus, a storm of domestic unrest was brewing within the opulent silk walls of the vizier's tent. Sit al-Husn, the Lady of Beauty, had spent the morning engaged in a labor of love. With her own delicate hands, she had prepared a tray of pomegranate tarts, following the secret recipe of her house, the very flavor that was the signature of her lineage. She intended them as a comfort for her father, Shams al-Din, and a treat for her son, Ajib, to remind them of the home they had left behind in Cairo. When Ajib returned from the city, his face flushed, and his tunic stained with the remnants of his adventure, Sit al-Husn greeted him with a smile. "Come, my son," she said, presenting the golden pastries on a silver platter. "Wash your hands and taste what your mother has made. These are the tarts of our ancestors, sweet with the memories of the Nile." Ajib, however, looked at the tray with the disdain of a critic who has just tasted perfection and found everything else wanting. He picked up one of his mother's tarts, sniffed it, and then tossed it back onto the plate with a clatter. "No," the boy declared, crossing his arms, "I do not want these." Sit al-Husn's smile faltered. "But Ajib, these are your favorites. You always ask for them." "That was before I tasted the real thing," Ajib retorted, his youthful arrogance sharp as a knife. "The cook in the city, the one covered in soot, his tarts are better. They have a spice that yours lack, mother. They taste like magic. Yours are merely dough and fruit." Shams al-Din, who had been reading correspondence from Egypt, looked up sharply. His pride in his daughter's skill was immense, and to hear her insulted, even by his own grandson, ignited a spark of indignation. "What is this nonsense?" the Grand Vizier demanded. "There is no cook in Damascus, nay, in all the world, who can rival the kitchen of Shams al-Din. You speak with the ignorance of a child who has eaten street trash and mistaken it for a banquet." "It is not trash," Ajib shouted, his own temper flaring. "I tell you, the man is a genius. His tarts make these taste like dry bread. If you do not believe me, send for him. Let him bake for you, and you will see that I am right." The tent fell silent. Sit al-Husn looked at her father, a strange unease settling in her heart. The recipe was unique. It was not something a common street vendor would know. For a stranger to replicate it and to improve upon it was impossible unless— Shams al-Din's eyes narrowed. The indignation faded, replaced by a sudden, intense curiosity. He remembered the prophecy of his youth, the severed bond with his brother, the mysterious groom who had vanished. Could it be? Was it possible that the threads of fate were pulling tight right here in Damascus? "Very well," Shams al-Din said, his voice low and dangerous. "We shall put this to the test. If this cook is indeed a master, let him prove it. And if he is a fraud who has stolen our family's secrets, he shall answer for it." He turned to his guards. "Go into the city. Find this cook shop. Seize the man who runs it, this baker of miracles. Bind him and bring him here. But do not harm his hands. I want him to cook for me. I want to taste this magic myself." The guards bowed and departed, marching toward the city gates with grim purpose. Ajib watched them go, a triumphant smirk on his face, unaware that his childish boast was about to shatter the walls of time and bring the past crashing into the present. The tarts of recognition had been served, and now the reckoning was at hand. Chapter 32. The peace of the cookshop, a sanctuary built of flour and sugar, was shattered not by a customer's bell, but by the thunder of armored boots. Badr al-Din was in the midst of kneading dough, his mind drifting to the memory of the boy Ajib and the strange pull he had felt toward him, when the wooden door burst open. The guards of Shams al-Din poured into the small space like a dark tide, their scimitars drawn and their faces set in masks of grim duty. Chef Himaj, old and frail, let out a cry of terror and dropped a tray of baklava. "What is this?" the old man wailed. "We are honest men, we have paid our taxes." The captain of the guards ignored him, his eyes locking onto Badr al-Din. "That is the one," the captain barked. "Seize him and tear this place apart." Before Badr al-Din could wipe the flour from his hands or utter a word of protest, rough hands grabbed him. He was thrown against the wall, the breath driven from his lungs. "Wait," he gasped, struggling against the grip of two burly soldiers. "What is my crime? I am but a cook." "Your crime is known to the vizier," the captain spat, flipping a table laden with pastries. "Destroy everything. Leave no stone unturned." The shop erupted into chaos. The soldiers, following orders they did not understand, but dared not question, began a systematic destruction. Clay ovens were smashed with the hilts of swords. Jars of honey and rosewater were hurled against the walls, shattering and bleeding their sweet contents onto the floor. Sacks of flour were ripped open, creating a white fog that choked the air and coated the soldiers like ghosts. It was a scene of senseless violence, a brutal desecration of the humble life Badr al-Din had built from the ashes of his exile. Badr al-Din watched in horror as his rolling pin, the tool of his trade, was snapped in two. His heart broke with every crash. This shop had been his refuge, his anonymity, his home. Now it was being erased. "Why?" he cried out, tears cutting tracks through the flour on his face. "Why are you doing this?" The captain did not answer. He merely signaled his men. They dragged Badr al-Din out into the street, binding his hands behind his back with rough hemp. The people of Damascus gathered to watch, whispering and pointing. "Look," they murmured, "the Prince of Pastry is a criminal. He must have poisoned a noble, or perhaps he is a spy." Shame burned Badr al-Din's cheeks hotter than any oven. He was marched through the city gates, stumbling over the cobblestones, his head bowed. He felt the weight of a curse upon him, first losing his father, then his bride, and now his freedom. Was he destined to lose everything he touched? They dragged him to the vast encampment outside the walls. The sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the tents. Badr al-Din was shoved forward, past lines of silent guards, until he stood before the main pavilion of the Grand Vizier. He fell to his knees in the dust, exhausted and terrified, waiting for the judgment of a man he did not know was his own uncle. Inside the tent, Shams al-Din waited, his face a mask of stone. But beneath the calm exterior, his heart pounded with a mix of fury and hope. He signaled for the prisoner to be brought in. The flap of the tent was thrown back, and Badr al-Din was dragged into the light. He looked up, his eyes meeting the fierce gaze of the old man on the raised cushion. And in that moment, the air in the tent seemed to thicken, charged with the electricity of a storm that had been gathering for 20 years. Chapter 33. The air in the vizier's tent was thick with tension, heavy enough to suffocate a man. Badr al-Din knelt in the dust, his hands bound, his face streaked with the flour of his ruined trade. He looked up at the stern old man before him, Shams al-Din, and felt a tremor of fear. Why had this powerful lord destroyed his life? What crime had a humble cook committed against the might of Egypt? Shams al-Din rose slowly from his cushions, his eyes fixed on the prisoner. He held something in his hands, a small, leather-bound book, worn by time and travel. He stepped forward, the lamplight catching the tears that glistened in his beard. "Do you know this book?" the vizier asked, his voice trembling. Badr al-Din's heart stopped. He stared at the object, his breath catching in his throat. That is my father's notebook," he whispered, disbelief warring with hope. "It was stolen from me 7 years ago, on the night the Jinn took me." "Where? How did you find it?" Shams al-Din did not answer. Instead, he beckoned to a servant who stood in the shadows, holding a velvet cushion. On it rested a turban of exquisite silk, stitched with gold. Shams al-Din took the turban and placed it gently on Badr al-Din's head. It fit perfectly, as if molded to his brow. The transformation was instantaneous. The cook vanished, and the Prince of Basra reappeared. The nobility that had been hidden beneath soot and sorrow shone forth like the sun breaking through clouds. Shams al-Din let out a sob and fell to his knees, embracing the young man. "My son," he cried, "my brother's son, my own blood. Allah be praised, for the lost is found." Badr al-Din was stunned, his mind reeling. "Uncle," he stammered, "you are Shams al-Din, the brother my father wept for." "I am he," Shams al-Din wept, "the fool who let pride separate us. But look who else is here." From behind a curtain of silk, a woman stepped forward. She had removed her veil, and her face was radiant with a joy that defied description. It was Sit al-Husn, the Lady of Beauty, the bride of the one miraculous night. And holding her hand was a boy, Ajib, whose arrogance had melted into awe. Badr al-Din stared at her, the memory of the wedding chamber flooding back with the force of a tidal wave. "My wife," he breathed, "it was not a dream. You are real." Sit al-Husn rushed to him, falling into his arms as the guards cut his bonds. "It was real, my love," she whispered against his chest. "The Jinn played their game, but our hearts were the prize. And look at what our love created." She pushed Ajib forward. The boy looked up at the man he had insulted in the cookshop, the man whose tarts had tasted of home. He saw his own eyes reflected in Badr al-Din's face. The pride that had armored his young heart shattered, leaving only the vulnerability of a son longing for his father. "Father?" Ajib asked, his voice small. Badr al-Din fell to his knees again, pulling the boy into an embrace that threatened to crush his ribs. "My son," he sobbed, "my beautiful, arrogant, perfect son. I have baked 1,000 tarts, hoping one would reach you, and now you are here." The tent filled with the sounds of weeping and laughter, a symphony of reunion that echoed into the night. The guards lowered their swords, wiping their own eyes. The servants brought sherbet and sweetmeats. Shams al-Din sat back, watching the family he had broken and then mended, and offered a silent prayer of gratitude. But amidst the joy, Badr al-Din remembered something. He reached into the pocket of the robe he had worn that night, the robe that had been returned to him. His fingers brushed against something small and hard. He pulled it out. It was the pouch of seeds, the seeds of the iron-barked apple tree from Basra. "These," Badr al-Din said, holding them up to the light, "these traveled with me. They are the only thing that survived the journey besides my love for you." He looked at Shams al-Din. "Uncle, let us plant them here. Let them be a symbol of our reunion, a tree that grows from the soil of forgiveness." Shams al-Din nodded, smiling through his tears. "Yes, nephew, let us plant them, and may their fruit be sweet, unlike the bitterness of our past." And so, they planted the seeds in a pot of silver earth, intending to take them back to Baghdad. They did not know, could not know, that these seeds carried a dark enchantment. They did not know that the fruit of this tree would one day cause a husband to kill his wife in a fit of magical rage. They saw only the beginning of a new chapter, unaware that they were sowing the seeds of the very tragedy that Rayhan was now narrating to save his life. Chapter 34. The golden light of the story faded, replaced once more by the flickering torchlight of the Baghdad throne room. The silence that followed Rayhan's tale was absolute, heavier than the stone walls that enclosed them. It was the silence of a world waking from a dream, the hushed reverence of an audience that has traveled vast distances without ever leaving their seats. Rayhan, the storyteller's slave, knelt on the cold marble, his throat dry and his limbs trembling. He looked up at King Rashid, searching the caliph's face for a sign of judgment. Beside the throne, Jafaar stood motionless, his eyes wide with the realization of the connections that had just been woven before him. "And so, O commander of the faithful," Rayhan whispered, his voice raspy with exhaustion, "the circle is complete." Badr al-Din and Sit al-Husn returned to Basra, united by the strangest of fates. They planted the seeds, those very seeds that had traveled from Basra to Cairo and back again, in the garden of their home. From those seeds grew a tree unlike any other. Its bark was dark as iron, its leaves shimmered with the residual magic of the Ifrit's flight, and its fruit was the crimson apple. Rayhan gestured toward the cloth-wrapped apple that still sat on a pedestal near Jafaar. "That fruit is a vessel of memory, my king. It holds the anger of the separated brothers, the passion of the reunion, the magic of the Jinn, and the sorrow of the exile. It amplifies the emotions of those who hold it, because it was born from the most intense human and supernatural feelings imaginable." When Arik held it, the apple fed on his jealousy and turned it into a murderous rage. When I lied about it," Rayhan bowed his head, shame flooding back into his heart. "I did not know. I was a fool playing with fire. I touched a relic of history and treated it as a toy. But now you know the truth. The apple is not merely a fruit. It is a legacy. It is the story of Nur al-Din and Shams al-Din made flesh." King Rashid leaned forward on his throne, his gaze distant, lost in the intricate tapestry of the tale. He stroked his beard, his mind turning over the events, the pride of brothers, the intervention of spirits, the miracle of the tarts, and the tragedy of the murder. "By Allah," the king breathed, "this is a tale to be written in gold ink on pages of silver. To think that a simple murder in my city has roots that stretch back to the courts of ancient Cairo and the realms of the Jinn. It is a wonder of wonders." He looked down at Rayhan, the slave who had caused a death, but had also preserved a history that might otherwise have been lost to the sands of time. "You have spoken well, Rayhan. You have painted a picture of destiny that shows us how small we are in the hands of fate. But a story, no matter how grand, does not wash away blood. A woman is dead. A husband is broken." Jafaar stepped forward, his voice low. "Majesty," the slave spoke truth. "The apple is cursed. Arik was under its thrall, as was the hunchback, as was Shams al-Din in his pride. Rayhan is guilty of folly, yes, and of a lie that sparked the flame. But he is also the keeper of this truth. Without him, we would never have understood the nature of the evil we faced." King Rashid nodded slowly. He looked at the executioner, who stood ready in the shadows, his blade gleaming with a hungry light. Then he looked back at the storyteller. "Rayhan," the king said, his voice firm but not without mercy, "you have bought your life with your words. I cannot bring Shivi back, nor can I undo the suffering of Arik. But I can choose not to add more blood to this cursed legacy." The cycle of tragedy began with a brother's harsh word. Let it end here with a king's forgiveness. Rayhan collapsed to the floor, sobbing with relief. "Thank you, O King of the Age. Thank you. I will serve you for 1,000 years. I will never speak a lie again." "Rise," King Rashid commanded. "You are pardoned. But let this be a lesson to all who hear it. A single object, a single lie, can span generations and cities. It can connect the fates of kings and slaves, of lovers and murderers. We are all bound by the threads of our actions, and we must walk with care, lest we wake the sleeping dragons of the past." The king stood, signaling the end of the court. "Jafaar, take the apple. Bury it deep in the earth, far from the reach of men. Let its magic return to the soil. And let the scribe record this tale, the story of the 3 apples, so that future generations may know of the wonders and the dangers that lie within the human heart." As the court dispersed, Jafaar took the crimson fruit. He felt its heavy, throbbing warmth one last time before wrapping it tightly in the silk cloth. He walked out into the night, under the same stars that had watched over Nur al-Din and Badr al-Din, and he knew that while the apple would be buried, the story would live on forever. Chapter 35. The last words of the slave's tale hung in the air of the throne room, vibrating like the final chord of a complex melody played upon an oud. The story of Nur al-Din, of the separated brothers, of the Ifrit and the Jinniya, and of the reunion in Damascus, had filled the hall with the ghosts of the past. Now, as Rayhan fell silent, the present rushed back in with the weight of cold stone and flickering torchlight. King Rashid sat motionless upon the emerald throne. His chin rested in his hand, his eyes staring not at the kneeling slave, but at the empty air, seeing the invisible threads of destiny that connected the living to the dead. He saw how a quarrel in a garden in Cairo had planted a seed of bitterness, how a magical flight across the desert had spread that seed to Basra, and how a single, enchanted apple had carried the concentrated weight of that history into the heart of his own city, Baghdad. The silence stretched, heavy and profound. Jafaar al-Barmaki, the Grand Vizier whose own life had hung in the balance, watched his master with bated breath. He knew that King Rashid was a man of justice, but he was also a man who feared the unseen movements of fate. The Caliph was weighing the blood of the murdered woman against the heavy hand of destiny. Finally, King Rashid stirred. He sat back, the silk of his robes rustling in the quiet hall like the whisper of dry leaves. He looked down at Rayhan, the large, trembling man who had started a catastrophe with a casual lie. "Rayhan," the king spoke, his voice low but carrying the undeniable weight of supreme authority. "Stand up." Rayhan scrambled to his feet, his knees knocking together, his eyes wide with the terror of a trapped animal. He expected the signal to the executioner, the flash of the steel, the end of his days. "You are a fool," King Rashid declared, his gaze piercing the slave's soul. "You played with truth as a child plays with fire, unaware that the house you stood in was built of dry straw. Your lie was the spark that ignited a tragedy. In the eyes of the law, your tongue is as guilty as the hand that wielded the knife." Rayhan let out a sob, bowing his head in acceptance of his doom. However, the king continued, raising a hand to silence the slave's weeping. I have listened to your tale, and in listening, I have seen the face of God's will. This apple, this crimson fruit from Basra, it was no ordinary object. It was a vessel filled with the magic of the Jinn and the intense emotions of a lineage defined by separation and longing. It was a cursed thing, waiting for a trigger. King Rashid stood up and descended the steps of the dais, walking slowly until he stood before the cloth-wrapped apple that lay on a pedestal. He did not touch it, but looked upon it with a mixture of awe and revulsion. Arik, the husband, was a good man, the king mused, speaking to the room at large. A man of love and patience. For him to turn so suddenly to murder speaks of a possession, a madness induced by this relic of the past. And you, Rayhan, you were but the wind that fanned the ember. If it had not been you, it would have been another. The apple demanded a tragedy, and it found one. The king turned back to the trembling slave. To kill you now would be to add another corpse to a pile built by sorcery. It would not bring the fair Shivi back to life. It would only feed the darkness that this apple craves. Justice must be tempered with wisdom. And wisdom tells me that you were a pawn in a game played by spirits. Therefore, King Rashid proclaimed, his voice ringing out, I grant you your life. You are pardoned of the blood debt. But let this mercy be a chain around your soul. Every day you breathe, remember the woman who died because of your vanity. Let her memory guide your tongue to truth for the rest of your days. Rayhan collapsed to his knees, kissing the hem of the king's robe, weeping tears of sheer, overwhelming relief. O Prince of the Faithful, O Fountain of Mercy, my life is yours. I shall never speak a false word again, not even to save my own skin. King Rashid turned to Jafaar, and as for Arik, the man sits in my dungeon, broken by his own hand. He is a murderer, yes, but he is also a victim of high magic. He shall not be executed. He shall be exiled to the city of Basra, to live out his days in prayer and penance near the grave of the woman he loved. Perhaps there, in the garden where the tree first grew, he can find peace. The Caliph sighed, a sound of immense weariness. This case is closed, Jafaar, but the lesson remains. We think we are the masters of our fate, but we are often merely travelers on a road laid down by those who came before us. A quarrel in Cairo, a wedding in the sky, a tart in Damascus. They all led to this room, to this verdict. Scribe, the king called out to the shadow where the court historian sat. Dip your pen in gold. Write this down. Record the story of the 3 apples and the tale of Nur al-Din. Let it be kept in the house of wisdom, so that future generations may read it and know that a single lie can span empires, and a single object can hold the weight of history. King Rashid looked once more at the wrapped apple, then turned his back on it. Take it away, Jafaar. Bury it deep, and let us pray that the seeds of such sorrow never bloom in our city again. Chapter 36. The hour was late, and the great city of Baghdad lay wrapped in a blanket of silence, save for the gentle lapping of the Tigris against the stone embankments. The hall of audience, so recently filled with the drama of life and death, was now empty. The torches had been extinguished, leaving only the silver light of the moon to filter through the high arched windows. Yet, in the heart of the palace, within the sanctuary known as the House of Wisdom, a single lamp still burned. Jafaar al-Barmaki sat at a heavy wooden desk, the smell of old parchment and iron gall ink filling his nostrils. Before him lay a fresh scroll of papyrus, its surface smooth and inviting. To his right sat the crimson apple from Basra, wrapped in its silk cloth, looking deceptively innocent in the dim light. It was no longer glowing. The magic within seemed to have retreated into slumber, satisfied with the chaos it had wrought. The Grand Vizier dipped his quill into the inkpot. His hand, usually steady when signing death warrants or treaties of war, trembled ever so slightly. He was not merely recording a case. He was inscribing a warning to the future. He began to write, his script flowing like water across the page. He wrote of the two brothers in Cairo, Shams al-Din and Nur al-Din, whose foolish pride over a hypothetical dowry had severed a bloodline. He wrote of the journey across the desert, the exile in Basra, and the birth of the two cousins, Badr al-Din and Sit al-Husn. He detailed the interference of the Ifrit and the Jinniya, the supernatural wedding, and the humiliation of the hunchback of Caparasso. He described the pomegranate tarts that had tasted of memory, and the reunion that had birthed the seeds of the iron-barked tree. As Jafaar wrote, he felt the immense weight of the tapestry fate had woven. It was a labyrinthine design, complex and terrifying. Who could have predicted that a seed carried in a pocket from Cairo to Basra would grow into a tree that bore the fruit of murder? Who could have foreseen that a casual lie told by a slave named Rayhan in a Baghdad market would be the final domino in a chain reaction spanning 20 years and 1,000 miles? Jafaar paused, looking at the apple. It was a terrifying object, not because of its magic, but because of what it represented. It was a symbol of the interconnectedness of all things. A harsh word spoken in a garden in Egypt had eventually led to the dismemberment of a young woman in Iraq. The world, Jafaar realized, was not made of isolated events. It was a single, breathing organism, where a tremor in one limb could cause a convulsion in another. He wrote the final lines of the chronicle, detailing the king's verdict, the mercy shown to the slave Rayhan, and the penance of the husband Arik. He noted that the apple was to be buried in a lead-lined casket, deep beneath the foundations of the darkest dungeon, never to see the sun again. When the ink was dry, Jafaar rolled the scroll and sealed it with the wax of the caliphate. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the sleeping city. Somewhere out there, Rayhan was weeping in gratitude for his life. Somewhere, Arik was preparing for his exile, his heart a ruin of regret. And somewhere, the spirit of Shivi perhaps found rest, knowing that her story had been told. The moral was clear, etched now into history. We are all bound by the consequences of our actions, no matter how small they may seem. A single object, passed from hand to hand, carries the weight of its journey. A single lie, whispered in jest, can shatter a dynasty. We walk through a world of invisible threads, and we must tread lightly, for we know not what distant bell will ring when we pull upon a string. Jafaar turned from the window. He took the wrapped apple and the scroll. He extinguished the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. The story was done. The mystery was solved. But the echo of the three apples would linger in the halls of Baghdad forever, a whisper in the dark, reminding all who heard it that destiny is the only true king of the world. And so the tale is finished. Glory be to the one who does not sleep and does not die, the knower of the unseen, the Lord of the beginning and the end. And so, the mystery of the three apples is finally laid to rest, serving as a timeless reminder that the weight of a single misunderstanding can ripple through destiny in ways we never expect. It is a tale that questions the nature of justice and the heavy burden of truth. If you held the power to decide the fate of those involved, would you have chosen mercy or strict retribution? Let us know your verdict in the comments below. To help us keep the lantern lit for future travelers, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hype this story so we can bring you more legends from the sands of time. We hope you journey back soon to the Midnight Oasis. Thank you.